Yeah, there you go. There you go. We in the house.
Akira.
Nice.
What's cracking, gang? How you doing? Hey, what up? There you go. There you go. What's cracking, baby? When dear in the Galleria, it's a beautiful day to be alive. How the goodness of you, how the very, very goodness art thou beautiful thing. It's a beautiful day to be alive right here. And we are broadcasting live from the peak of what we call the human civilization. I'm in Mexico. I'm in Quintana. I'm in Playa del Carmen. We've got Jordan B in the house. That's perfect. We've got Dirk from Texas in the house. We've got Joe Rooney in the house. We've got Platinum Hippie in the house. We've got Samuel Miller in the house. Broken Umbrella, Jacob, Nathan, Platinum. All of you all. Good to see you. It's a beautiful day, and I thought, well, here's what happened. Is I got the multiple notifications from multiple people saying, hey, there's a new doctor. JRE Doctor, new JRE Doctor, new Peterson on the JRE. And I was like, oh man, how am I going to have time to listen to that? I have all these things that need doing. There is no way I'm going to find 3 hours to do that. And then I was like, oh man, I need to stream this weekend. And then I was like, oh hey, we could do both. We could listen to the new Dr. Jordan B. Peterson on the JRE podcast and stream, and I could play some delightful accompanying music, you know, and that might be like a delightful way to spend an afternoon. How about that? Platinum Hippie says, love your work, bro. You are breathtaking. God bless you. What up, Nathan Dunn? What up, Smiller? Who else we got in the house? We got Shecky, we got 2076, we got Austin Zumbrana, Gypsy. Thanks for the meaningful heads up, says Austin. Hey. We got Sheila in the house. What's up? It's an amazing day, says Dirk. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So delightful to see you all here. If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. You know? If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. And speaking of which, let's kick off the broadcast. Before we get into the podcast, let's listen to the brand new single, just dropped, Akira the Dawn, Kurt Vonnegut. If this isn't nice, I don't know what is.
If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. Music, please.
Shout out to everyone in the Discord. Link is in the description of the broadcast. What up, Vipol Money says, man, your work is amazing.
Akira.
More power to you. God bless you.
Nice.
Now, every lecture I've ever given has included my tribute to my Uncle Alex, my brother, kid brother, who was a graduate of Harvard and a wise man, a distant insurance salesman in Indianapolis. He was childless. But what Uncle Alex found objectionable about so many human beings is that they so seldom noticed it when they were happy. So we would be sitting under an apple tree, for instance, on a July afternoon, drinking lemonade and, you know, talking about this and that, practically buzzy like honeybees. And alcoholics would stop everything and say, wait a minute, stop. If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. I don't know what is. If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. I don't know what is. would do that again and again, and it was very good advice, and I've taken it up. And I hope that you will take up this habit too, of noticing when things are really awfully nice, and say, if this isn't nice, I don't know what is. And say, if this isn't nice, I don't know what is. If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. I don't know what is. If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. I don't know what is. If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. I don't know what is. If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. I don't know what is.
What up, dog? This is nice. I don't know what it is. That's brand new Akira the Don and Kurt Vonnegut. Some of you may remember me making that on stream in Costa Rica. Shouts out in the chat if you were there when we made that in stream on Costa Rica. It was unplanned. It was a moment, and it led to that. That's actually a song I've been wanting to make for decades and decades. Ever since I first read. I had a Kurt Vonnegut. I can't remember. It was like a collection of essays or something. It was a very thin book. Had like a sort of cartoon of him on the front. It's in storage in Wales along with the first 30 years of my life. So I don't have access to it. But he told that story in that book, and I wanted to make it into a song then. You know, it was nearly a song on my, which album was it? Second album? It was nearly a song on the second album, and then I thought it would make more sense on the third album. And then I didn't make that album, you know. Anyway, I've been wanting to make that song for a long ass time. You know, I've had that philosophy of noticing when something is awfully nice and saying, if this isn't nice, I don't know what is. I've had that since then, and it has served me very, very well, you know. And I hope it serves you well, you know, as it serves so many out there, you know. Shouts out to the uncles, that's right, we got love for the uncles in the chat right now, you know. Much love for the uncles. It's true, you're more powerful than you think, you know. Shouts out to the uncles. Shouts out to my uncle Gene, the lone wolf, says 2076. Exactly. Big up Joe Petrakovich, thank you for the super chat, says The Dawn. That's what's up. So yeah, that track is out now on all platforms, streaming, download, etc. You know, if you're subscribed on the Bandcamp, you'll already have a high quality file of that in your collection. Yes, you will. And yeah, we're going to go in on this. Before we do, we have a sale, January sale running for 2 more days or something on meaningwave.com. It only just started a couple of days ago. Our January sale started like at the end of January because, you know, we're innovators and thought leaders in the space. Use the code JAN, J-A-N, to get 20% off your order at meaningwave.com. Get yourself something fly, like say this, like a nice shirt like this one. We got lots of nice shirts, you know what I mean? We got all manner of beauteous things. Get over to meaningwave.com, open up another tab, head over, have a look around. Hey, if you've got a favorite Meaningwave record, chances are we've got the artwork from that record on a t-shirt now in the Wave Art collection, you know? So you might like that, or you might want to get yourself a velour tracksuit. Velour tracksuits in the house. Edmund Thunder says, ooh, not late. You right on time, baby. You right on time like Black Box in 89. Did you notice, by the way, that I did not begin the broadcast late? I was right on time like Black Box in 89. That's nice. If that ain't nice, I don't know what is, you know. That's because I spent hours last night setting up. I wasn't sure I was able to do this kind of a show You know, the kind of a show where we essentially live DJ score a thing. The way I was doing it before involved a bunch of technology that is in Texas, not here, you know. But I managed to hook something up, you know. So let us pray to the gods that it works. I think it will, you know. So let's pray it will. Let's do an international high five before we begin. I know you'll love that. Shout out to everyone in the chat. Let me know where you're from, where you're at, and how you're feeling on this fine day. Not where you're from. Let me know where you're at and how you're feeling. Let me know where you're at and how you're feeling on this fine, fine-ass day, you know? It is a fine-ass day. Shecky says, the last design with all those butterflies. So beautiful. The latest design. Yeah, that's the artwork for if this isn't nice, I don't know what is. Which I made. And the cat in the middle, that's our cat Dakota. That's the cat that my son Hercules, the street cat that he befriended and then we adopted. So if you check out the art for If This Isn't Nice, I Don't Know What Is, that I made so lovingly, that is Dakota, the Mexican street cat. And, you know. Shaky says, Uncle Pete taught me how to handicap them ponies. I don't know what that means. I'm terrified. Oh my goodness. Chip C loves the Scott Adams tracks. Shouts out to you. Cypher says, my half-uncle tried to teach me skateboards when I was 12 and he was 17. Didn't work, but all the balance I have, I owe to him. Shouts out to him. Crack Tune says, picking up a shirt now, bro. Shouts out to you. Wisdom be thy name, Crack Tune. Up in the room. What up, old stock white Canadian? Says, I do not know what the Don is cooking for the future, but I can tell you this. Unacceptable is hats. That's the song that came out last week with David Goggins. We might play that later. But we're going to do this. We can do this. Chip C says, I'm telling you, ATD, we need to get the Muppet Bus together to get your stuff from Texas to Mexis. Yeah, we've got to work that out. It's more complicated than just loading up a van. You have to do all this crazy stuff at the border. They're actually very serious on the Mexican border about things going into Mexico. You know? Trinidad says, blessed AF. Shouts out to Mike Can at level 1. Level 1 can download the mixtapes like the Meaning Pill Matrix mixtape we just dropped. You can download all the mixtapes for free if you're at level 1. I suppose it's not free, you're paying $5 a month. Either way, $5 a month and you get a ton of mixtapes and access to all the emojis and stuff. It's a great deal. Question, will you be releasing Decentraland Party Set number 3? That would be nice. Yes, good point. And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. We've been collecting footage from the live Decentraland Metaverse performance, multiple camera angles. It was epic because it started raining when Sound of the Rain Needs No Translation came up, you know. But yes, that is coming. And thank you for asking. Frank the Rabbit says, heck yeah, awesome. We got Old Stock White Canadians in Montreal. Anas is in Morocco. Much love to you. Cracktoon is in Asheville, NC. Amazing, getting even better. We got Cody King in Oklahoma. You know what I mean? We got VJDII in Tampa. Shout out to Tampa. There's a great Chief Keef and Young Gravy song about Tampa. Trinidad's in Austin. You know, we've got people all over the place. Much love to all of y'all. Open up a tab, go meaningwave.com. Buy yourself something. Code Janet, check out. Join me for a high five. Let's go. A 3, a 2, a 1. S and indeed get it. Ooh.
I didn't even notice you have a two-tone suit going on.
Can
You're
I tell
a wild
you about
man.
this suit?
Please do.
Okay. Well,
What's happening with that?
company made this for me, LGFG. They made me a dozen suits.
Yeah?
One for each rule from 12 Rules for Life.
Ah.
The rules are printed on the back of this underneath the collar. This is a heaven and hell suit, so it's quite fun. So
Which one's hell?
I'll show you in a sec. So this is hell's red, Joe. Come on,
But
Jesus.
that's not really red.
Well,
It's like
you
a
know,
magenta,
It's stylish.
right?
Yeah, it's okay. Hell's magenta. You know?
Okay, hell's
yeah, it's
magenta.
designer hell.
Ah,
You know?
nice.
So this is made out of sheep's wool, and this is made out of goat's wool. So that's pretty funny. And then in here you've got your basic heaven lining and your basic.
Oh, okay.
So
I don't think I've ever seen a man
Sheep's-
walk around with a. I think you're one up.
my one up?
Yeah, you're one up. Are you?
No, that's
No,
good.
you're good?
It's double-breasted.
Double-breasted.
Yeah. Got one suit with you in the lining too.
Oh, no.
I was going to wear it today. I thought about wearing it. It's a black suit with platinum wires in it, which is kind of cool. And inside it's got black and white images of like really sharp, harsh graphic images of you and Brett Weinstein and Ben Shapiro and Russell Brand and, you know, as an assortment of the
Oh, that whole
Sam
intellectual dark
Harris
web
too.
thing.
That's
Sam's
the guys,
in there.
man. Sam's in there too. Yeah.
I still have hope for Sam Harris.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah, I hope he makes a comeback.
I mean, he's not really going away. He's just got some weird opinions.
Yeah, well,
But-
there's plenty of that floating around.
Well, you know, I think when you have like complex, fascinating brains, they go off in all kinds of different directions. Don't you think?
This is one of the dangers of being creative, right? Most creative ideas are wrong, and a good section of those wrong ones are fatal. But now and then you get one that's necessary. So
Yeah, we were talking about the Twitter files before
Yeah.
we got rolling and what the new stuff is. So the new stuff has something to do with AI and some sort of content moderation.
oh yeah, well Tabby released some Twitter files today on Twitter obviously, and they're going through the code. Now I don't understand the technical details, but you don't exactly know when you see the output of a code-generated system exactly what rules it's using to sort the information. I suppose that's the equivalent of shadow banning. And there was apparently all sorts of directives built into the code to amplify certain kinds of messages and de-amplify others. And so apparently Musk is doing what he can to clean that up. Rubin reported that the other day. Yeah. And then Tybee today, he was talking more about the whole Russian collusion fabrication.
Yeah.
So that's also real fun.
Well, how about the one guy that was going after Trump, who it turned out was actually in collusion with the Russians?
Oh yeah, that's a rough one. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, the best defense is a good offense, and so
I guess. Yeah, I guess.
I know.
But
we're in a
it's
crazy
like,
world.
why would anybody not think that was going to come around to get them?
It's amazing how often people don't think that what they're doing isn't gonna end up aimed squarely at them.
Well, this Twitter thing, right? Like, they never suspected that someone like Elon was going to come along and buy Twitter and then, in an unheard of tactic, have a bunch of journalists review everything in all of their Slack meetings and all their emails, look under the code, look under the wiring under the machine and find out how it was actually running. And why would, I mean, the fact that anyone would ever think that any of this stuff is a good idea, that people don't understand, like, the dangers of censorship. They don't understand where this leads to.
Yeah, well, we're seeing a little bit of that emerge on the right now, which is kind of frightening to me. So I'm an admirer in many ways of what's going on in Florida, with DeSantis. But him and Rufo, who I also think has got a bit of a clue, are trying to, what would you say, limit or even ban critical race theory. And the problem with that is you can't define it, right?
Right.
So how do you control something you can't define? And the answer is you battle it out on the battleground of ideas. Because as soon as you start to try to define it and then try to censor it, well, first of all, that's just going to grow because that's how those things work. Like where does critical race theory shade into Marxism? Well, who the hell knows? Where does Marxism shade into socialism? That's an even harder question. Then where does socialism shade into, just being on the side of the working class? Well, all that's fuzzy beyond belief. And so once you get to the point where the government has to step in and regulate, say, what education systems are doing, you're already in deep trouble. And because I don't see how it can really be done. Because I can't define critical race theory. More or less you can get some sense of the cloud of ideas that's associated with it. But, But trying to draw the lines, how are you going to do that? And then, of course, you enable, inevitably, no matter what your goal is to begin with, you're going to control a certain form, let's say, of pathological communication, misinformation. That's just going to play into the hands of people who like to censor, and that's just as likely on the right as it is on the left. So, no, it's a real dangerous game.
And is it a problem, like the term critical race theory it's open to interpretation?
Yeah, well, it's often even hard, except in retrospect, to understand a lot of what these things actually are, because new clouds of ideas emerge and they kind of have an animating spirit, and they have a set of associated, what would you say, presumptions, and you can often only see what that is in retrospect. It took me a long time to understand whatever existentialism was enough to sort of define it, phenomenology, these different schools of thought that occupied the thoughts of psychological investigators over a couple of centuries, postmodernism, modernism, it's not an easy thing to extract out the gist of those and define them. Plus, as I said, they have very fuzzy boundaries. So,
what I saw with DeSantis was he had a concern that it wasn't just black history that they were putting into this critical race theory, but that he saw that there was queer theory, which was in this thing that they were teaching in school. And like, how does that have anything to do with black history? Like, why is queer theory inserted into that?
I think the way those are linked is essentially through what you might regard as, it's an implicit Marxism, but it's even deeper than Marxism. So if you're a Marxist, you have a heuristic that simplifies the world, and that heuristic is that you can understand any social relationship from an intimate relationship all the way up to the state by just dividing the parties, let's call them the narrative partners in a discussion or an interaction, into those who are oppressed and victimized and those who are taking advantage of them and profiting. That's basic Marxist theory of economics. And there's obviously some truth in that, because when systems become corrupt, that's how they operate, right? It's exploitation and victimization. And every system tends towards corruption. And if your eyes are open a little bit, or if you've moved from naivety to cynicism, then you can see every interaction as a power dynamic. And then that drives, as soon as you have that established, that idea that the basic relationship is one of power, well, then you can see, there's no difference between what's happened to queer people in relationship to those in power and what's happened to black people in relationship to those in power. But it's united by that underlying. That's why I always make a case for the domination of something like postmodernism and Marxism. I've been criticized for that, but I think it's an accurate association. The postmodernists figured out, and they were right about this, that we see the world through a story. Now, that turns out to be something unbelievably complicated, and I think all the top-end neuroscientists like Carl Friston are, converging on this presumption that you have to see the world through a story. And the postmodernists actually figured that out, the French postmodernists, Foucault and Derrida and people like that. But then they did something that was a sleight of hand, and this all happened in the 1970s. They said, we have to see the world through a story, and even if you're a scientist, you're not exactly objective, because there's a narrative driving your work that you might be unaware of. That's your implicit narrative. That's what might be implicitly biasing you. But they jumped to the conclusion that the underlying narrative was one of power. It's basically that all human relationships are predicated on power. There isn't a more cynical viewpoint than that. And it's easy to take apart, if you think about it for a moment, in a practical sense. If your marriage is just based on power, first of all, it's an unpleasant place because it's tyrant and slave. And second, good luck with that, because people aren't that easy to tyrannize, Maybe you have a willing slave in your wife, but I doubt it. If you're just trying to play power games with her, she's going to fight back with everything she's got. And then if you have friends, it's like, that's a relationship of mutual exploitation, is it? Then you're just a bully with henchmen, and they're going to stab you in the back the first chance they get.
You're a mob man. You're a mob leader.
Yeah. Well, worse than that even.
A dictator.
You're a dictator. And you know, people say, well, look at how successful dictator psychopaths can be. But I look at them and I think, well, that's your definition of success.
Yeah,
man.
what is success? I mean,
Yeah.
how are you
You're the biggest
spiritually
devil in
fulfilled?
hell.
Yeah, are you happy?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well,
well,
what
the
is-
leader of a bad place might be the person who's worst off.
Yeah.
In some fundamental sense, right? They're the most corrupt.
Isn't that funny though that the way we define success is power and money? Like those are like you look how successful they are.
Yeah.
Power and money, but a complete absence of love and trust and respect and
Yeah, well, it's
Basic human
you know,
dignity.
well, it's also not really how people operate. So there's an anthropological literature on the formation of elders in say traditional societies, because you might ask yourself, you know, who becomes an elder? And if you were a Marxist cynic, you'd say, well, those who used exploitation to dominate, like the priestly class or something like that, and that goes along with the supposition that, you know, religion is the opiate of the masses. And some of that's obviously true, but a lot of it isn't. The elders aren't that at all. They're the people who others go to spontaneously to ask for counsel.
Yeah.
And then you ask, well, who do people naturally gravitate towards for counsel? And the answer is, well, productive, generous people who've managed their interpersonal relationships well. Because who the hell else would you go ask for advice to get any sense? Like you might go ask the local dictator and kowtow to him if you need a favor to take somebody out. But if you're actually asking for counsel, you're going to ask someone who's decent and who's generous and who plays a reciprocal game. It's also the case, this is worth knowing too, the problem with a power game is that it's not playable, not in the final analysis. So Frans de Waal, the Dutch primatologist, has showed even pretty clearly in chimpanzees, you know, you think the roughest, toughest chimpanzee rules the damn roost and he pounds everybody flat and he gets access to the females. And there's a little bit of truth to that because female chimps aren't sexually choosy, but the male chimps will chase weaker males away from them. And so if you are more powerful physically as a male chimp, you do have preferential mating access. But the problem with being a brute, even if you're a chimp, is that you have an off day and two of the chimps that you oppressed band together and tear you into pieces. And so what de Waal found was that in chimp troops, the stable alpha can sometimes even be the smallest male of the troop. He'll ally himself with some of the dominant females. He makes networks that are essentially friendships, reciprocal friendships. And that gives him a stable position, not of power, but of authority. And that's definitely the case in functional human societies. It's not based on power. Now, it's tricky because if it degenerates, then it degenerates into a relationship of power. You know, and so that means that critics who make the claim that everything's about power are right in some sense when they're talking about nothing but corruption, but they're really 100% seriously wrong about the idea that it's power relation that constitutes the basis for the organization of any social interaction. You know, it doesn't work in your marriage, doesn't work with your friends, doesn't work with your children, doesn't work with your business partners, doesn't work with your customers, it doesn't work with politicians, although here's another twist that's complicated. So imagine you have a population of people who basically cooperate reciprocally. So, you know, I do you a favor, you do me one, and maybe we figure out how to advance each other across time. That's a good game, right? Fair trade plus advancement. That's a good definition for a good marriage. Okay, but now you have a community of people like that together. Okay, now it opens up an ecological niche, and the niche is psychopathy. And the psychopath comes in and pretends that he's a productive, generous reciprocator. But he's not. He's just an instrumental manipulator. But he can get away with it because there's enough wealth generated by the cooperators, you know, the honest cooperators, so that there's a space for someone to exploit the system. And that stabilizes at 4% of the population. So, you know, across the world, 4% of people are close enough to clinically diagnosable psychopaths. And that's probably better than being, you know, paralyzed by fear and anxiety and just staying in your bed. It's better in terms of reproductive success, let's say, and maybe even success in general. But it's not a good game because in the real world, most psychopaths get found out pretty quickly. So, you know, you can screw somebody once and maybe twice, but then they figure it out and then word gets around. And so in the real world, two things happen. Psychopaths have to be itinerant, so they can find new people to exploit. And the other thing that happens is generally non-psychopathic males who are fairly aggressive keep the psychopaths under control. And so part of the reason that women like men who have some capacity for aggression, but who are still productive and reciprocal, is that men who are productive and reciprocal, who have some capacity for aggression, can keep the real monsters at bay. So it's hard on women, because they have to navigate that really thin line between productive generosity and the capacity for aggression. That's a really tough thing to navigate. That's basically the story of Beauty and the Beast, the Disney movie, right? Because Gaston is a narcissistic psychopath. And the Beast is someone capable of aggression, but he's not tamed into a reciprocal relationship. It's also the basis of the most fundamental female pornographic fantasy. And the Google guys figured that out, 15 years ago when they analyzed billions of sex fantasy searches by men and women. Men go for visual imagery, but women go for story. And the story's the same. It's, innocent young woman with a lot to offer, but kind of hidden. Find some male, 5 categories of men: vampire, werewolf, pirate, surgeon, billionaire. And he's, kind of an aggressive guy, but he's capable of being tamed into an intimate relationship. That's the standard female pornographic fantasy. And it's pretty much the standard fantasy of romance. And so you can see, what women are trying to do in that situation is they're trying to find some guy that's got the capacity for mayhem, but that's under control, but who can integrate that into a productive, generous, reciprocal relationship. And so, yeah.
It's fascinating because the capacity for violence and the capacity for aggression is one of the things that's been actively muted in our male population.
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of reasons for that, and some of them turn into positive feedback loops, like they're sort of self-fulfilling prophecies. So there's a lot of women out there who've never had a positive relationship with any male in their life, right? And maybe not only not a positive relationship, but really a series of pretty negative relationships. And so women like that are very leery of any expression of male ability of any sort, because they can't distinguish productive competence from arbitrary power. And because they're trying to defend themselves, because they've been hurt repeatedly, maybe they come from broken families and catastrophically arranged neighborhoods, one of the tactics that can be used in that situation is just to try to do everything you can to distance yourself as much as you can from any display of male ability, because it can't be distinguished from psychopathy. It can't be distinguished from the use of power. It takes a sophisticated woman to be able to make that distinction. So the other thing you see too is that young women are much more likely to be seduced by psychopaths than older women, because the psychopaths mimic competence. That's what a narcissist does too. They're confident, and women read confidence as a marker of competence, and that's reasonable. But that opens up it opens up a space for exploitation, because if you can mimic confidence, that's false confidence, narcissistic false confidence, then you look competent, and that works particularly well on naive young women. And of course they get exploited by people like that, and they think, well, that's what men are like.
Right.
Yeah. Then women like that, they have boys, and then they're afraid of the boys whenever they express anything looking like masculine competence, and they basically emasculate the boys, and then the boys get bitter, and then they mistreat women, and the whole bloody thing just spirals out of control. And that's where we are.
That's where we are. What a strange place to be, isn't it?
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. Unintended consequence of familial breakdown. That's a huge part of it.
So we decided to have this conversation because of what's going on with you in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
And that your clinical psychology license is in jeopardy because you have opinions about politics that they disagree with, which is a very dangerous and bizarre turn of events.
Well, it's your fault, actually. I told you, I think, a week or so ago when we talked about this. Okay, so let me give you some background here. So
I want to know how it's my fault.
I will. I'll tell you. A lot of things are your fault, as it turns out.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So the College of Psychologists has basically levied what are equivalent to about 13 lawsuits against me simultaneously. Now, the reason I call them lawsuits is because they're actions undertaken on behalf of a complainant Now, the complainant can be anyone anywhere in the world who complains about me for any reason. They don't have to be former clients. They don't even have to be anybody I've ever met. They don't even have to have met anybody I've ever met. So,
So it could be someone online.
Well, it is. All this is pretty much, all these complaints are someone online. None of them are my clients, although half of them claim to be falsely. And the college didn't throw out their complaints despite that. So, which is really quite interesting.
And what are the complaints?
Well, okay, let's see. One complaint is about the tweet I made about Ellen or Elliot Page. And when I said that a criminal physician cut off her breasts and that pride was the sin. So now I'm in trouble again because I just said the same thing. One was about Sports Illustrated cover where they featured that overweight model, and I tweeted out "not beautiful," and I guess that was something like fat shaming. I don't remember exactly what the charge was. And then I criticized Justin Trudeau and a former staff member of Justin Trudeau and Jacinda Ardern. I made a joke about her. I was going to New Zealand, and the New Zealand leftist press was freaking out, and I made this joke about bringing my alt-right trolls to New Zealand, and then I put in parentheses, or maybe they're just, ordinary people who are trying to clean up their rooms. So apparently that was casting the profession into disgrace. And then they submitted, one complainant from the U.S. submitted the entire transcript of our last discussion. So I don't know how to defend myself against that, because apparently everything I say, and apparently everything you say too, is bringing the profession of psychology into disgrace. And I think they're most upset in that case about my comments about the inadequacy of climate models. And so, what that has to do with my clinical practice is questionable, to say the least. And so, anyways, does that cover it?
Yeah, it seems like this climate thing is a very rigid ideology that one must subscribe to wholesale.
Yeah.
You can't have any nuanced opinions on it, and you can't have any.
It's a religion.
No variation.
It's a religion.
Yeah.
It's a partial pseudo religion, and I mean that technically. I'm going to write about this to some degree, and I'm writing a new book which will come out in November called We Who Wrestle with God, and I'll cover that in this. But Alex Epstein, who wrote Fossil Fuel Future recently, comments about this a bit. So the basic structure of the quasi-religious belief, and so this is the set of initial presumptions. That's a way of thinking about it. We were talking about how ideas are structured earlier. The Marxists believe that everything's about power. There's a narrative at the base of any belief system, and the climate pseudo-religion is based on characterization of nature as something like a hapless, hapless, defenseless, fragile virgin. The industrial activity of mankind is characterized as something like a rapacious, power-mad, demolisher of natural virginity and beauty. And then the human being the individual is characterized as nothing but a devouring mouth whose activity runs contrary to the untrammeled beauty of the planet, and that supports the activity of the tyrannical patriarchy. That's basically it. And so the reason that narrative has force is because it draws on underlying religious archetypes. And so to characterize the world properly, you do need to characterize the positive aspect of nature, because you have to live in something approximating a reciprocal harmony with nature. Because if you just eat everything and devour everything in your local landscape, well, then you die. So that's a bad idea. So you have to have some sense of the value of nature. Now, you also have to have some sense of the fact that if you were dropped in the jungle naked in the Amazon, you'd be dead in about 48 hours. So you also need a figure to characterize the negative element of nature, and that's completely absent from the environmental myth. That's part of what makes it pathological. And then with regard to the rapacious tyranny, let's say, well, any industrial system or any human organization can exploit the natural world to the point where that's not sustainable, and it can become oppressive and tyrannical. That's the evil king, ancient part of religious mythology going back as far back as we can chase it. So you need a representation of the negative aspect of society, because you send your kids to school and they kind of get turned into these cookie cutter kids, and that crushes their innate what would you say, difference and beauty, and it's all the pain of having to be socialized. And you have to understand that there is this oppressive element of culture. And so, but then, you should also wake up and notice that you've got the wise king too, and that means you plug in your damn toaster in the morning and the electricity works, and you go out on the street and everyone isn't rioting, and there's workmen who are knee deep in the sludge trying to keep everything going, and you're not starving to death like everybody on the planet was in 1860. And so a little gratitude for the positive end of the patriarchy is in order too, and that's completely absent in the environmental view. And then with regard to the individual, it's like, well, of course you can be a selfish, impulsive, hedonistic consumer, and you can facilitate the rapacious tyranny as a consequence of that, rape the planet. But by the same token, we're not a cancer on the face of the earth. We're not a virus that's mutating and taking out the planet, and we're not trapped in a Malthusian nightmare. And you got to give credit where it's due. And, there's an element of people, of everyone, that's noble and generous and kind and productive and capable of living in a well-ordered state in something like sustainable and productive harmony with nature. You only get half that story. Now, if you have no comprehensive underlying cultural narrative, which is increasingly the case in our society, and someone offers you, when you're a teenager, half the religious story, that'll just snap you up in a second, because it helps you order your relationship with the world. It gives you a pathway too, So Jean Piaget, great developmental psychologist, he called the last stage of adolescence the messianic period, the messianic stage. Now, most people don't talk much about that, I think, because they don't know what to make of Piaget's claim, but he was a real genius, Jean Piaget. And he said, when you're making that transition from the group identity that you're chasing as a teenager to becoming an individual, and that's not a journey everyone takes, because lots of people just get lost in group identity. You're going to be looking for a pathway that's essentially heroic. And what that pathway should be is that you identify with your culture deeply. You are socialized deeply into the traditions of your culture, but you're also capable of transcending it. So then you become a culture creator as well as a disciplined member of culture. But young people need to be offered something like a vision of destiny in order to catalyze their identity. And we're very, very bad at that, except on the ideological front. So the woke types come along and say, the planet's a virgin, the great father's a tyrant, you could be a hero if you just stood up to that. And the kids think, well, I'd like to do something important with my life. And so they're just caught into that immediately. But because it's a one-sided story, a one-sided religious story is an ideology.
And a great representation of that is what they've done with Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny, because I thought 10 years ago, we live in the delusion of a disturbed 13-year-old girl. How did that happen? And then, Greta Thunberg showed up, and I thought, oh, well, there we go. Now we've got the 13-year-old. I feel sorry for her, because she was chased into this apocalyptic terror that we're trying to enforce on all our kids. And then you think about her position, so now she's all afraid, and her mother's facilitating that like mad. And then, she announces her fear, her neurotic fear, essentially. It's driven by negative emotion. And, Macron says to her, oh my God, Greta, you're absolutely right, bows. It's like, what the hell's a girl to think? Because what she really wants is to freak out a bit, and for someone calm and reasonable to say, hey, look, kid, the apocalypse has always been on us. It's always the case that the future has the possibility of being dreadful, but, we've conquered terrible things in the past and overcome massive obstacles, and there's no reason at all not to assume that we can do the same thing.
That's a very important point.
Well, yeah.
It's such an important point, because there's never been a time ever where everything was perfect.
Well, that's for sure.
There's never been a time ever environmentally where the Earth was stable. No. If you go, stable, currently you can kind of guess what the weather's going to be. But if you look at models of thousands of years, it's never been flat. It's always been up and down. Heats up,
the Earth was
freezes.
an ice ball many times.
Many times.
Yeah. So well.
Randall Carlson was saying there's been times in our distant past where the CO2 levels and the oxygen levels were so fucked up that we were close to losing all life on Earth.
Right.
and then this can happen.
See, the antithesis to that is to believe in something like the intrinsic paradisal stability of well-balanced Mother Nature.
Right.
It's like, yeah, a bit, but no, not really. There's a lot of variability, of course, that kind of variability, that's hard on people because you want a certain amount of stability so you don't die.
Right, but it doesn't deny that human beings have an impact on us either.
But no. Well, this is why I really respect Bjorn Lomborg, because Lomborg's hard to grasp because he forces you to think complexly. He says, well, we don't have one problem, carbon dioxide, which is, I don't even think it's clear that carbon dioxide is actually a problem, but we can leave that aside. That'll get me in trouble with the college of psychologists again. But, Lomborg says,
it's a factor.
Yeah, it's a factor, yeah. But there's lots of factors, and God only knows what the most pressing problems that confront us truly are. When I wandered through the ecological sustainability literature about 10 years ago, and I concluded a couple of things. One was that the best way forward to a sustainable planet is to make everyone who's poor rich as fast as you possibly can.
And that's Lomborg's position.
Not to put limits to growth on, because it turns out if you get people above about $5,000 a year in average GDP, they start taking a long-term view of the future instead of scrabbling around in the dirt trying to get lunch, and you're going to burn everything up around you to stay alive if you have to.
Right.
But if you got a bit of wealth and now you can think over, maybe a 20-year period, which is quite the damn luxury, then you actually start being concerned about, the quality, the aesthetic quality of the local environment. And so I was so excited when I found that data because I thought, this is so cool. It means that we could have our cake and eat it too. We could work really hard to provide cheap, reliable energy, at the lowest cost possible to the widest number of people worldwide. And the emergent consequence of that would be the whole planet would clean itself up. So wouldn't that be great? Because we could make our goal the eradication of absolute poverty, which we actually done pretty good at eliminating over the last 15 years, but we could really make that a goal. And then one of the consequences of that, inevitable consequences, would be a greener and healthier planet. And then you think, well, why aren't we doing that? And that's a question, all right. And I think part of the reason is I've been trying to understand the driving ideas underneath this globalist utopian tyranny that seems to be developing from the top down. And I think it's driven, at least in part, by this religious vision that I already described, that you have to construe culture itself, especially industrial culture, as the tyrannical father raping and pillaging everything in its way, which is unbelievably dangerous way to think, too one-sided. And the idea that you have to impose limits to growth on people in order to have a sustainable planet. And that's allied with a view that probably stems all the way back to people like Paul Ehrlich in the 1960s, who really believed, truly, that maybe the planet should only have 500 million people on it, or 1 billion, in relative poverty, or 2 billion barely scraping by, because otherwise they're going to be wrecking everything and, controlled by some top-down authority that makes bloody well sure that no one's consuming too much. And so when I look at ideas like that first assumption, the planet has too many people on it, it's like, I don't like to hear people say that, because when I hear that, I think, okay, buddy, who exactly are you thinking about getting rid of? Oh, well, it's not like that. It's like, yeah, it's like that.
It has to be like that.
It is absolutely like that. So, it's easy to get all paranoid conspiracy theorist about the WEF, say, and maybe there's some utility in that, but, I don't think anybody's sitting at Davos going, well, we got to scrap 7 billion people. But if the underlying narrative is the one I just described, virginal planet, tyrannical patriarchy, and rapacious individual, and you believe, well, we're overpopulated like Paul Ehrlich has believed since literally the mid-1960s, then how is it not going to be that the policies that you craft stemming from that narrative are colored by the belief that there's far too many people? Like, I've really felt that I've been at war for the last 6 months. And I would say it's war because what I observed happening in Europe when I was there last was that, well, you can see this, you don't have to be in Europe to see it, but it's more direct if you're there, is that it's pretty damn clear that the globalist utopians are willing to sacrifice the poor for the sake of the planet. And they're doing that by cranking energy prices up through the roof, and that means that people die. Lomborg has estimated that maybe you have to turn your thermostat down by 3 degrees, right? Save the planet. We don't have enough energy. We'll pay you not to use your electricity between 5 and 6, which is what they're doing in the UK. You turn your damn thermostat down 3 degrees, that sounds like nothing. But if you're old, that radically increases the probability that you'll get a respiratory disease and die. And if the Europeans would have had a cold winter, and that could still happen, Lomberg estimated it'd wipe out 135,000 people. It's like, well, we're just making energy more expensive. It's like, what do you mean you're just doing that? So imagine the economic system. It's a pyramid. There's a bunch of people at the top. They have almost all the money. That's par for the course for any productive system. Any system that's productive ends up with a distribution like that. It's like a law of nature. And then you move farther down the pyramid till you get down to the bottom where most of the people are, and they're barely clinging on to the edge of reality, right? It doesn't take much of a crisis to tip them into, death. And then you crank up energy prices. Well, what happens is you just take a bunch of those people at the bottom of the distribution, the poor that the left is so, hypothetically concerned with, and they're just done. They go from barely hanging on to not hanging on. And their kids go from having some ghost of a chance of opportunity to having none. And I could see this coming. You really saw it happening in Germany and the UK, where we have this absolute rat's nest of way more expensive energy. And this is where it gets extremely perverse. You might say, okay, look, we have to save the future poor. And so now some of the present poor are going to have to suffer. Well, that's convenient for you if you happen not to be one of those poor people, but let's give the devil his due and say, okay. It's like, that'd be fine with me. Not really. That'd be fine with me if the consequence of your actions, raising energy prices, for example, actually produced an improvement in those things you wanted to improve. So, for example, energy is more expensive, but now the air is cleaner. But that isn't what's happening in Germany. Right. What's happening in Germany is energy is like 5 times as expensive, and the coal plants are back on. So it's like, even by your own criteria for success, you failed, and you did it at the expense of the poor. And, the World Bank estimated, I don't remember how many months ago, it's probably 9 months ago, that we're putting 350 million people on the brink of starvation because we're cranking energy prices up. And so for me, it's like, that's 350 million people. That's 3 times as many as the communists killed, in their 6 decades of trying. And if your cure for the planet is, well, we got to put 350 million poor people in jeopardy just so that things are hypothetically better in 100 years, I think. Yeah, I don't think so, buddy. And also, it's a little bit too convenient for me that your prescriptions to save the planet are accompanied by this insistence that the only way forward to that is to give you all the power. It's like, there's a bit of a moral hazard in that, don't you think? It's like, I'm just saving the planet. Give me all the power. It's like, you want to save the planet? Or do you want the power? And let's put the second one first, because the probability that you're a saint or the Messiah is pretty damn low. So that's the danger of the Davos crowd.
It's a very bizarre narrative that doesn't get challenged. And I don't hear this very nuanced, complex perspective like what you're laying out right now. I don't hear that often. And no, I don't hear it at all. I hear it from you and maybe a couple other people that I actively seek out. But you would think that when you're dealing with such a complex issue that you would want to see the most brilliant minds think out, how does this play out?
Like okay.
What are the consequences?
Well, so let's think about what mitigates against that. Okay, so first of all, young people are looking for a productive and visionary pathway forward. We already covered that a bit. But then there's the dark side of that too. And the dark side of that for everyone is that our reputations are very important to us. They're our most crucial currency, and what that means is that we're tempted to elevate our reputations in an undeserved manner. And we do that to gain social status with very little work. And so we're tilted towards being tempted by theories that provide us with an easy way forward to that. And so one is, well, I'm a good person. Well, how do I know that? Well, I'm concerned about the planet. Well, that's a complex problem, the planet, right? That's a trillion problems, not one. I'm concerned about the planet, therefore I'm good. but that's complicated. You got to take it apart. No, you don't. You just say, well, the planet only has one problem. Well, what's that? Untrammeled industrial activity and the rapacious nature of the consumer. Okay, what's the output? Too much carbon dioxide. Okay, I'm against carbon dioxide. Well, bang, you're the messiah, with no work. And then someone like Lomberg comes along and says, hold on there, guys. We got like 30 problems, not one. And we need to rank order the problems, and we need to do a differentiated analysis. And your idiot interventions are going to cause nothing but unintended consequences. And no one wants to hear that because, number one, it's complicated. You got to read the damn book and you got to think through his arguments. And number two, well, now where are you going to get your cheap moral virtue? You can't just be the messiah by waving a banner that says, I don't like carbon dioxide. And so that runs against a very, very deep narcissism. And so that's part of what stands in opposition to people, especially people like Lomberg.
And that's accentuated by social media.
Yeah, definitely.
Like greatly.
Yeah. Well, social media is a great place to garner unearned social reputation.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be gamed, and it is gamed. And we also even know the nature of the people who game it. There's a whole emergent psychological literature concentrating on dark tetrad traits. So we can walk through that a little bit. So the standard personality models that produce the big five, extroversion, eroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness, they were derived sort of with a primitive AI, that's a way of thinking about it, that looked for patterns of description across huge corpuses of linguistic data. How do people talk about each other? It turns out they talk about each other using 5 dimensions, and those are the dimensions I just described. But the people who derived the big five didn't use evaluative descriptors. They threw anything out that looked like a value judgment. So, for example, you might say of someone, he's a good person, and you might say of someone else, he's a malevolent person. Those descriptors weren't included in the big five corpus because they were trying to derive a model of normative personality. Okay, so, but that meant that the pathological personality wasn't encapsulated or well-defined. Now, this guy Robert Hare, who worked at the University of British Columbia as world's leading authority on psychopathy, and he interviewed hundreds and hundreds of psychopaths and was always fooled by the way. And then he had a student, Dale Paulus, who works at UBC, and Paulus developed a model of personality that was based on pathology, like on the dark side. And he called that the dark triad. Machiavellianism, that means Machiavellian is someone who, so let's say, if I was Machiavellian in our discussions, what I would have done was think, before I came here, I thought, well, what can Joe offer me? And then I'd think, well, how can I play Joe with my language so I'm most likely to get what I'm, the narrow, impulsive, selfish thing that I'm aiming at right now. So that's how a Machiavellian operates. A narcissist, that's the next part of the dark triad, is someone who wants social status without doing any of the work. They want all the attention. If you're dating a narcissist or in a relationship with a narcissist, they'll alienate all your family members and your friends so that they get all the attention. And that'll just be the first of the games they play with you.
Yeah.
Then you have psychopathy, and the psychopaths are parasitical predators. And so the predator will take whatever you've got, and the parasite will live off you. And then here's a parasitical ideological statement. Property is theft, a classic Marxist trope. Why would you say that? Well, if I want to live off you, the way I'm going to justify that ethically is by claiming, oh, Joe, look how privileged you are. You've got all this money. You just took that from the oppressed. And if I'm manipulating you so that I get some of your money, that's only just because, first of all, it's exactly what you did. And second of all, well, why not spread some of that wealth around? So that's Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy, dark triad. They've expanded that recently to add another dimension that was missing, sadism. And the sadist takes positive delight in causing pain to others. And the lulz culture, L-U-L-Z, the lulz culture online is a culture of sadistic, Machiavellian, narcissistic psychopaths.
Lulz, meaning like people are joking around shit posting.
Yeah. I did it for the lulz, and it's the plural of LOL, laugh out loud. But like, if you look at the Urban Dictionary, for example, the definition of lulz is positive delight in the suffering of others. It's like, sadistic. And bloody well, social media just facilitates I
never thought of lulz as being sadistic.
It's in and of itself, it's not a sufficient marker. right? You have to have like 6 or 7 things going on before it's clear that you're manifesting this underlying tetrad of personality traits. Like if you use the odd acronym and you're throwing out a joke at someone, this is a habitual pattern of doing nothing but provoking people online and using deception and lies to do it to attract attention to yourself. It has to be a very consistent pattern. But Paulos, first of all, and his crew of researchers and people who've been influenced by him have laid out this 4-dimensional structure of the dark side, let's say. And they've shown that hyper users of social media, Instagram, for example, and people who do a lot of anonymous shit posting are characterized by, what would you call it? Domination by those 4 traits. And part of the reason for that, this is very, very dangerous to our whole society, I think, is that you got to ask yourself what keeps the psychopaths under control in the normal population. And the answer seems to be, especially on the male side, is that narcissistic aggressive men get put in their place by non-narcissistic aggressive men. And that usually has to do with something like the threat of physical intervention. You know how it is if you get a bunch of guys together. I can make a joke about you, and I could even make a joke that was, it sort of put you down. But the joke would have to be funny. You'd have to have the opportunity to reciprocate, and you'd have to believe that I was doing it in good spirit. Because if I just used the opportunity to, stick the knife in, we're not going to get along with each other very long. And we know that, and men know that when they talk to each other. And so part of what keeps dialogue among men civilized is the possibility that it won't be civilized if it goes too sideways. And everybody knows that. But there is none of that online. Because anybody can post anything about anyone, no matter how denigrating and derisive, especially if they do it anonymously, and there's zero consequence. In fact, quite the opposite. If they're good at it, they get a lot of attention, and the social media companies will monetize it. And so not only is it not inhibited, it's actually facilitated. And this isn't a trivial problem, because if the psychopaths multiply enough, they take the whole society out. So I think virtualization enables psychopathy. And it's worse than just the trolling bit. That's bad enough because it pollutes political dialogue and it makes everyone think that everything is more unstable than it really is. But online criminality is actually a terrible plague. I don't think there's an old person in North America who isn't being targeted by some gang of psychopaths who's, documented all of their interests and their locale and who knows how much money's in their bank account and who's doing everything they possibly can at every second to leverage access to it. That's just happening continually. So
that's certainly algorithms, right? For a lot of people that get trapped into these sort of situations where people are constantly throwing at them things that are opportunities for them to either make money or get this or
get
avoid
a refund
pain. Get a refund.
You bet. Or they befriend them. They get it in, and some lonely old character who's not functioning cognitively quite like he used to, he gets sucked in by someone pretending to be his friend and offered a great investment opportunity. And it's very, very, very difficult to track this sort of thing online. So you get the real enabling of the criminals, because how the hell, if they're anonymous, how the hell do you keep them, how do you hold them to account? And then the secondary derivation of that is something like trolling, and that's really not so good either, because if the psychopathic, narcissistic, Machiavellian sadists are dominating the political discourse, then ordinary people look at that and think, oh my God, everything's going to hell, everyone's really extreme, and really it's a non-random sample. And so, I can really see this in my own life, because if you just looked at me virtually, you'd think like I was the world's most embattled person in some way, maybe not the world's most, but I'm up in the top 10 maybe. But in my real life, then I don't have any problems. I go around from town to town or from city to city, and every interaction I have with people on the street is positive. They either don't know me, which is fine, or they do, and then we have a positive interaction. And I've only had like 3 negative interactions with people in real life in the last 6 years. Like, they stand out because they're not fun, but they're extremely rare. But online, it's like, 50% of the people oppose Jordan Peterson. It's like, no, they don't. It's not even 1%. So we're building a virtual world that doesn't sample the real world very well, and that's not much different from building a delusion. So not good. Very, very very unsettling. So,
That's Twitter.
yeah.
Well, it's certainly Twitter before Elon Musk came along.
Yeah, well, Twitter's better, but it's still quite the snake pit.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I think might be done about that. See, I don't think that I've made this claim on Twitter that there's something cowardly about anonymous posting, and I'm not going to retract that because I believe that in 99% of the cases that's true. Now, people say, well, you know, if you're a whistleblower, you have to be anonymous, and what about people in totalitarian states or in a company? Well, that's the whistleblowing problem, I think. Yeah, 1% of anonymous posters are heroes, but like 80% of them are Machiavellians. And so...
Well, but there's also the factor of people that don't want to get in trouble at work.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's kind of the whistleblower problem.
But not even whistleblowers. I mean, people that just have opinions that
You mean that might get them in trouble with the College of Psychologists in Ontario, for example?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. And so, well, I think one of the ways of handling that technically, what I'd like to see happen at Twitter, for example, you know, not that I'm in a position to know because I know it's complicated, is I think the anonymous types should be separated from the real people. So you could go visit them and see what they have to say, but the verified people, you know, their comments are either at the top or in a different place. Because I don't think that we can set up a playable game online when the anonymous trolls have the same rights as the verified responsible people. And I also think, and I don't know what you think about this, Joe, but, you know, let's say you want to be a whistleblower, you want to say something that's going to get you in trouble at work. So you want to do it anonymously. It's like, maybe you're shirking your responsibility. Because maybe you have a responsibility, you know, and I could be persuaded alternatively, but maybe you have a responsibility if you have something to say it in your own voice and to put yourself behind it. You know, and maybe you're taking the easy way out by not doing that. And, you know, I don't want to say that about every single person who posts anonymously, but, you know, tyranny emerges when normal, honest people are now afraid to say what they think. And when the tyranny is complete, the totalitarian state, no one ever says what they think about anything. Everyone lies all the time. And I see part of the pathway to that, the unwillingness of ordinary people to take the consequences of their truthful speech. You know, and I also think that's detrimental to them because I think that you find the adventure in your life. I think this is certainly true of you. You find the adventure in your life by standing behind your words. Like, that's you, right? Those are your words. If you're telling the truth, that's actually you. And there's going to be consequences. And sometimes they're going to be negative. But do you really think that the consequences of telling the truth in your own voice are negative? You think the world's structured like that? Jesus, that's a dismal view, man.
Well, it depends on the amount of autonomy you have. It depends on the amount of resources you have.
Yeah.
I mean, like, let's take, for example, nurses. Nurses who had contracted COVID during the pandemic and had developed natural immunity. There was already studies that showed that natural immunity was superior to the immunity that was imparted by the vaccine, but yet they were being mandated to take this vaccine.
Yeah.
And a lot of them had some serious apprehensions about it that were logical, based on people that they knew that had adverse reactions. And now we're finding out more and more how common those adverse reactions were. Now, if these women stepped up, or these men who are nurses stepped up and said something about it publicly, they would be fired.
Yeah, well, look, when I was working as a clinician, I had lots of clients who were in that position. You know, they're at work, and they're being tyrannized by sometimes it was DEI types, and sometimes it was
DEI?
Diversity, inclusivity, and equity. You know, the woke ideologues who were coming for them and not letting them say what they wanted to say politically. And sometimes they were just being tyrannized by garden variety narcissists. You know, their bosses were that sort.
Yeah.
And it was crushing them. And, you know, it's easy to say to people like that, well, just stand up to your boss, but they often were rather constrained in their employment opportunities, and they had families. And so you can't tell people, well, just go shoot off your mouth stupidly, get fired and taken out and mobbed and let your family starve. That's a pretty dumb strategy. But what we would always do in the therapeutic endeavor with someone in a situation like that was to situate themselves in their life so that they could afford to abide by their own truth. And so that might mean if you're in a job, let's say, where you don't have freedom of expression, You know, you get your resume or your CV polished up so that if necessary, you could make a lateral move relatively quickly. Maybe you send out some job applications just to test the market. And if you're not marketable, maybe you pop up your skills. And then maybe if you're in a position where you're vulnerable because someone else has got control over your tongue, maybe you work real hard to put some other ground under your feet so that you can't be taken out so easily. You know, like when I opposed the Bill C-16 in Canada, the mandatory pronoun bill, like I knew, first of all, I knew that would cause a psychological epidemic. I told the Senate that back in 2017. I said, you guys don't know what you're doing here. You're going to confuse a lot of adolescent young women, and for every girl you hypothetically save who has body dysmorphia, and that'll be a vanishingly small number of people who are actually saved, you're going to doom like 300. Of course, that's exactly what's happened. That's why the Tavistock clinic shut down in the UK. You know, and so there was that, but I also had set myself up, you know, because I had 3 streams of income. I had my university salary, I had a clinical practice, and I had a business, and that wasn't accidental. You know, I knew from my clinical practice that if you wanted to say what you had to say, you had to put yourself in a position where you couldn't be easily taken out by the mob or the tyrant. And then I would say, well, if you're not in a position where you can afford to say what you have to say, then that's an indication that you haven't positioned yourself optimally, existentially, you haven't positioned yourself optimally in life. Your foundation is too weak. And so, you know, maybe it'll take you 3 years to fix that, you know, so that now you're grounded firmly so that a casual objection from your boss or even being fired isn't going to take you out. It's not like that's easy, but I mean, abiding by the truth isn't easy. The only thing, but it's a lot more preferable than abiding by falsehood. That's the problem, right? Of course, abiding by the truth isn't easy, obviously. But, you know, what sort of devil do you let into your head if you abide by falsehood? And some of that might be just not saying what you have to say. And that's not just, you know. Mostly we regard sins of commission as more egregious than sins of omission. You know, an outright lie is worse than just failure to say what you know to be the truth. But when enough people are silent about things they know they have something to say about, then you have a tyranny. And so, well, we haven't sorted through all this, you know, very well in our society, but I think it's morally incumbent on all of us to set up our lives so that we can afford to tell the truth. And if you can't, well, then you think, no, you haven't got the hatches battened down, right? The walls of your towers, your fort aren't high enough. You're not properly armed. And you should be, because you know the mob's coming for you. And so is the chaos of nature. And you bloody well better be prepared. And so I think if you're anonymous, you're depriving yourself of the necessity to put yourself in a position where you can tell the truth. Now, think about what happened to you. Now, you tell me what you think about this. I mean, I've been watching you for a long time, and it's quite remarkable seeing the impact that you've had that keeps increasing across time. You know, but my experience with you is that, you know, you have your opinions, your perspective, and you'll put them forward. But mostly what you do is you ask people questions that you actually have as questions, right? As far as I can tell, you're mostly trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And so that's honest. It's honest exposition. It honestly exposes your own ignorance as well. And, you know, you can take the audience along as a consequence of that. And for you, the consequence has been, you know, you've gone from just doing this podcast, sort of a side thing for you, at least when it started, to being, I don't know if there's anybody who has more impact as a single individual on the media environment worldwide than you do. And that's all a consequence of actually truthfully admitting your own ignorance and saying what you had to say. And I know you were set up to do that because you had multiple streams of income, you know. You couldn't easily be taken out. You'd already accomplished things in a multitude of spheres. But think of the consequence of that. Think, well, did that happen to anybody who did everything they could to ask stupid questions and tell the truth? The answer is maybe. You know, so you don't do that, you hide, and you have your reasons. You know, your family's at risk. It's like, fair enough, man, but you deprive yourself of the great adventure of your life, and you contribute by remaining silent to pathologization of the whole society. So, well, that doesn't seem like a very good route to me.
You're making sense. But it's a very, very complex situation for someone who has put all their eggs in one basket, like particularly someone who's a nurse who has to work long hours, doesn't have another stream of income, and isn't really making enough money to have a nest egg saved away.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, maybe a single mother, and yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a woman in Canada right now, a nurse whose name unfortunately I forget, who's being hauled over the coals by her college for making the radical claim that there are only two sexes. And so I know, and part of the reason I'm pursuing this action with regard to the Ontario College of Psychologists, well, there's two reasons, really. Three. One is, leave me the hell alone, guys. You've been on my case nonstop for 7 years. Not once before that. In 20 years of practice. There's no complaints ever levied against me. It wasn't until I started to become, relatively well-known publicly that the college came after me. And 7 years of that gets to be a bit much, especially now that there's 13 lawsuits compiled up, and all of them are for political opinions, and half of them have been put forward on false grounds. But even that's not enough for me to engage in the battle. The reason I'm engaging in the battle is, well, first of all, you want me to do social media retraining so I communicate better according to your experts? So like, experts by what criteria exactly? What's a social media communication expert? You got any documentation that even exists as a field? And how do you know that if you have that social media expert train me, that I'm going to be a better therapist? There's no body of data that suggests that in the least. So I'm not going down that route.
We should explain that, because
so I've already been sentenced, right? Yes. So this isn't a threat by the college. This is what the situation already is. I haven't been hauled in front of their disciplinary board yet, but they've already convicted me of disgracing the profession and sentenced me to an indefinite period of re-education. And that's the second most serious punishment that they can levy against a professional. The first is to take away the license. The second is to undergo this retraining and to publicly announce the necessity for that, which they've already done in my case. And so now I have to sit down with these experts at my expense for an indefinite period of time until I'm trained properly, whatever the hell that means, by the criteria of the so-called experts and the college. And that isn't pending an investigation. That's already in place.
It's such a wild request, too. Retraining, just even the way they phrase it, it's so bizarre, so Orwellian.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's your fault,
social media.
It's the whole transcript of our last conversation. I don't imagine they'll be that happy with this one. But the other reason I'm pursuing it, and to the degree that I'm able to keep my head clear during this process, because it definitely makes me angry, and really made me angry over Christmas when I was spending Christmas going through the minutiae of all these bloody lawsuits, trying to figure out what the hell they were up to, instead of, taking a bit of a break and having some time with my family. And so I was very upset about that, but to the degree that I'm upset about it, I'm not doing it right, because this can't be personal, can't be about me. Part of the reason that I want to pursue this, and part of the reason we're pursuing an objection to what they're doing on Charter of Rights grounds in Canada, is because they're interfering with my freedom of conscience and speech. And again, it isn't even the case that the reason that that's a problem is because it's about me. The reason it's a problem is because the colleges in general, like the regulatory boards of professionals, are doing this to everyone. Lawyers, physicians, teachers, massage therapists. There's all these licensed professions. And if you're a licensed profession, the government establishes a board of your peers to regulate conduct of the professionals. Now, and in a functional time, all that happens then is that generally the people who get in trouble with their own clients, right? With the people they've been dealing with directly. And then the board steps in on the side of the person who's been injured by a pathologically practicing professional. And fair enough. But now it's been weaponized, and it's been weaponized as a political tool too. And it's not like activists don't know that. And it's so preposterous because I have 20 million people following me on social media, and God only knows how many views of my videos, for example, or the interviews you and I have done. It's tens of millions. And like, how many people complained? 20 out of millions? And then the college didn't have to pursue those complaints. They have to investigate them. So I don't know what they're doing now, because, of course, they've been inundated by thousands of complaints about their own behaviors. I have no idea what they're going to do about that. But they didn't have to investigate. They chose to investigate. And as I said, they did that despite the fact that half the complainants claimed to be my clients and weren't. So what we have here is we have 13 people who complained about me hypothetically doing harm to someone they didn't know, to someone who they didn't know, anyone who knew, as a consequence of things I said on social media. And that all of them, not only were they fourth-hand claims of harm, which no psychologist would ever claim that a fourth-hand account of harm constituted a valid measurement. So the bloody college is violating its own measurement standards by even pursuing this. But so not only are they based on fourth-hand information and then an outright lie, which is they were clients of mine, they're also predicated on the assumption that it's okay to go after a professional for expressing political criticism. Because literally half of them are, well, I said something about Trudeau. I said something about one of his top aides. I said something about Jacinda Ardern. I said something about an Ottawa city councillor in relationship to the trucker convoy. I said something about climate. Every single one of the complaints is political. And so why is that a problem? Well, see if you can figure it out for yourself. That'd be the first answer. And the second is, I have a friend in Canada, a very well-known physician, international reputation, and a reasonably decent secondary income stream. And when this all hit, I reached out to him. He's a very brave guy. He's done a lot of writing that could easily get him in trouble. I said, look, maybe I could get you and Bruce Party, this lawyer at Queen's University, who's gone after essentially the college that functions for lawyers. I said, we should do 3 letters, same time, saying, that the colleges are chilling free speech in Canada with psychologists, with physicians, and with lawyers. And he said he didn't have his house in order enough to dare to take on the college. And the problem with that is that I don't know anybody in Canada who's a physician that's more well situated than him or braver. And even he was loath to do it. He'll do it eventually, but not now. And so here's the situation we're in for all you who are listening. If you go to see a professional when you have a crisis, a psychologist or a physician or a lawyer, let's say, you bloody well better hope those people are telling you the truth. So here's an example. Let's say you got a 13-year-old girl and she has body dysmorphia. That's very common among 13-year-old girls, especially if they hit puberty early, because when women hit puberty, their levels of negative emotion go up. That's a very well-established clinical finding. And the reason for that, likely, is that when women hit puberty, the world becomes more dangerous to them, right? Because they're sexually vulnerable. And that's also when you get body dimorphism develop. So men get bigger than women. And so, women should be more intimidated in relationship to physical combat because they're not strong enough to prevail. So they should be a little more anxious about that. And so they're sexually vulnerable. So they should be a little more anxious about that. And then also, they should be a little more anxious because they have to take care of infants. And if you're going to take care of an infant, you should be a little more sensitive to threat because the infant is extremely vulnerable. So anyways, that kicks in women when they hit puberty. It's very well documented. This is why women have 3 to 5 times the rates of anxiety and depression worldwide. It's because their baseline levels of negative emotion are higher. Okay, so now, but that also translates into something very specific for women. So anxiety and depression, shame, guilt, all those negative emotions, they make you self-conscious. And self-consciousness takes the form of bodily shame in women, much more than in men. So if you're a girl and you hit puberty early, so you're dealing with the complexities of all that when you're still pretty immature, and your negative emotion goes up, the probability that you're going to negatively evaluate your body is virtually 100%. There's no difference, especially in women, between feeling bad about their bodies and being high in negative emotion. It's the same thing. So I just interviewed this Chloe Cole, who's detransitioning and suing her so-called medical professionals who rushed her into a double mastectomy at 15, and the wounds have never properly healed, by the way. So that's her life. And I basically ran her through a clinical interview. I said, hey, kiddo, when you were 12 and miserable about your body, what the hell was going on? She said, well, I thought more like a boy. She's a little autistic, so she's more thing-oriented than people-oriented. And so she didn't get along with girls that well. And then she was dreaming that she'd turn out like Kim Kardashian, but she turned out to have kind of a boyish figure. And then she thought, well, I'll never really be a good, full woman. And so maybe I should be a boy. And she started to toy with that. And then she went to her medical professionals with this body dysmorphia. And instead of sitting her down and saying, look, kid, you hit puberty kind of early. You got a partially autistic personality style that makes you a little more comfortable with boys than girls. And every girl there is suffers body dysmorphia at your age. So just tap her cool, the fact that you're embarrassed about yourself and feeling inadequate. It's like, that doesn't mean you're marked out as pathological. It certainly doesn't mean you're a boy. No one ever told her that. That's like basic information, man. They just rush her along the pathway. Puberty blockers at 13, and then a double mastectomy at 15.
What is causing this rush to that? Like, how did this happen, and how did this happen so quickly?
Well, this is partly tied up with this issue of the college. So here's one way into it. So now professionals are bound by law to offer gender-affirming advice. They're bound by law. Okay, so this is what this means. If you bring your 13-year-old in to be evaluated by a physician or a psychologist, and maybe she has high levels of neuroticism, tilting towards depression and anxiety, and then that's making itself manifest in bodily discomfort, now that's being shaped by this cultural fad that insists that if you feel uncomfortable in your body, it's because you're of the opposite gender. That's the psychological epidemic part of it. And we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. But now you're duty bound by law, if you're a professional, to say, oh, you think you're a boy? Yeah, absolutely. You absolutely, 100%, you are. What can we do to facilitate that move forward? And that all got, what would you call pushed into the law under the guise of the elimination of conversion therapy. So, unbelievable. Now, the problem with that is, you see, if you're a therapist or a physician, you don't affirm someone's identity. That's not your job. And your job is not to deny their identity either. Your job is to help them explore their identity and hopefully to develop it. And so someone comes to you, maybe they have body dysmorphia. And so maybe they're anorexic. That's a form of body dysmorphia. And so the first thing you do, if you have any sense, is you note that that's stemming out of an underlying, more global proclivity to suffer from depression and anxiety. So that's the big elephant in the room, depression and anxiety. So if the trans activist types say, well, the body dysmorphic types are more likely to have suicidal thoughts, it's not because they have body dysmorphia, it's because they're prone to depression and anxiety, and depressed and anxious people are more likely to have suicidal thoughts. And maybe body dysmorphia adds a bit to that, but nobody really knows. Probably adds some. But the fundamental issue is one of depression and anxiety. So now you're suffering from, unspecified self-consciousness, and the culture twists around to offer you a narrative. And the narrative is, oh, well, you're in the wrong body. And then the carrot is, and this is part of it gets extraordinarily pathological, a lot of these kids who are suffering from this alienation are unpopular. And so now they're being enticed. It's like, yeah, well, you're not unpopular. You're interestingly special. So if you just take this carrot, you're the opposite sex. All of a sudden, you're not a victim. You're a brave, what would you call it? You're a brave seeker after your redemptive identity. And now you can be elevated. And you can be treated specially. And my God, if you're an unpopular teenager, how could anything be possibly more attractive than that? And then you also think, well, why are teenagers gullible in that way? Why do they go along with the crowd? And the answer to that is, that's what you're supposed to do when you're a teenager. That's your job, right? Because first of all, you're with your parents, and you're not yet a fully fledged individual. So what you have to do is you have to become part of the group. And if you're not part of the group, well, maybe you're a stellar, creative genius and you're exceptional in that manner, but more likely you're just a loser who couldn't fit in. And that sucks, that's for sure. So your job when you're a teenager is to fit in, as every teenager knows, and maybe not just to fit in, but to fit in a positive way that elevates the community. But we could just settle for fitting in. And so teenagers are wired to go along with the crowd. And then if the crowd is offering something pathological, and that happens all the time, you get a psychological epidemic. And I knew that. I told you. I told the Senate this in 2017. And why did I know? Well, I knew the literature. We've tracked psychological epidemics going back 300 years. 300 years. Here's some of them. Multiple personality disorder. It cycles in society. Disappears, then there's one case, then it spreads like mad. Then there's multiple personality disorder everywhere. Teenage girls mostly. Then people get skeptical about it, and it dies. And maybe it disappears for a whole generation or two. Then a case pops up. It does this. That's happened for 300 years. Cutting was a psychological epidemic. Bulimia was a psychological epidemic. Anorexia was a psychological epidemic. The satanic daycare ritual abuse accusations that came out in the 1980s, that was a psychological epidemic. And the rule basically is that if you confuse people about a fundamental element of their identity, then those who are already so confused they're barely hanging on are going to fall prey to that, and all hell's going to break loose. And that's exactly what's happened in the trans situation.
But the difference between this one as opposed to the other ones like multiple personality disorder is that this one is being reinforced culturally. Like you are rewarded.
Yeah, well, the multiple personality disorder, that happened there too, because you'd get a lot of attention from media, especially the people who are the first, who display the first symptoms of multiple personality disorder. Get a psychologist or a psychiatrist or an alienist, if you go back far enough, who reports this fascinating case of multiple personality. And, there are people who are dissociative. So they kind of have multiple personalities. They're united by memory. They're usually creative people, because creative people have multiple personalities. That's what makes them creative. They're not the same from day to day. You could even say they have fluid identities. And so the claims of the gender types that some people have fluid identities, it's like, yeah, creative people do. They're the purple-haired types with like nose rings and tattoos. That's all part of trait openness. You combine that with high neuroticism, negative emotion, then you get people who are fluid in their identity, who are also prone to depression and anxiety. So that's also crystal clear. And so, look, if you're an outsider, do you want to be a dull and contemptible outsider? Or do you want to be an interesting and compelling and nouveau, exciting outsider? Well, if you're a teenage girl and you've been unpopular, that's brutal, because, you get tied up with those mean girls. Yeah. They shun you and exclude you. It's absolutely brutal. You're just living a peripheral existence. You got no friends. Everyone's contemptuous of you. And maybe that's partly because you have something that marks you out from the norm, like a tilt towards autism, because a lot of the people, it was just released with the Tavistock staff. The Tavistock closed down in the UK. That was the big gender surgery performing institute in the UK.
How was that closed down? What happened?
Government closed it down.
So
because they knew that they figured out in the UK that, wow, the rates of transgender transformation requests were skyrocketing. And even the people at the clinic knew that they were rushing people along the transformation pipeline way faster than they should have without proper clinical evaluation. There's 1,000 lawsuits out against the Tavistock in the UK now. 1,000. Out of, I think, 30,000 transition processes.
So what is the difference between the way the UK is processing this versus the way we are?
Well, we're still where the UK was 3 or 4 years ago. We haven't woken up to the fact that, all hell's going to break loose on this front with people like Chloe Cole, launching lawsuits. That's the only thing that's ever going to stop this. Lawsuits, absolutely. Yeah. Or jail sentences. So, it's absolutely appalling. This is part of the reason that I felt like I've been at war for 6 months.
It's so crazy that what you're saying here, although it's backed by the literature, it's obvious you have an expertise in this area, that this is labeled as transphobic.
Yeah,
this is a transphobic
Well, it's even worse than that, because the data, and this was known, let's say 10 years ago before this all became an issue. Ken Zucker in Toronto, he was the world's leading authority on transgenderism. He divided it into two parts. There's the autogynephilic types. Those are the guys who get sexual kicks from dressing up in women's clothing and then go do drag queen story hour. Say, well, we're just, pristine and pure. It's like, no, you're not. You're getting a sexual kick from dressing up in women's clothing. And let's not bloody well forget it. And you can't even say that now, but every clinician worth his salt knew that for decades. And then there's another subpopulation, and those are usually gender non-conforming kids. And, like a conservative skeptic might say there's no such thing. It's like, no, there is. So your typical gender non-conforming kid would be the perfect target for this, would be feminine boy or a masculine girl who's high in trait openness, so has kind of a mutable identity, who's also high in neuroticism. And there's lots of kids like that. And so they don't fit in that well with their peer group. They're tomboy girls or feminine boys. And then if you track a lot of them, some of them develop body dysmorphia. They're not very happy with themselves at puberty because they don't fit in. But Zucker showed very clearly, he ran the transgender treatment clinic at CAMH in Toronto for decades, and he was one of the world's leading authorities in terms of publication. I think he was the editor of the lead journal for years. They just took him out in Canada, fired him and disgraced him, and he battled on the lawsuit front for like 10 years and was eventually vindicated, but he didn't have a political bone in his body. He was a clinician through and through, He wasn't playing political games, documenting autogynephilia. That was just clinical reality. Now it's become verboten to even suggest such a thing. Oh, there's nothing sexual about this. It's like, yeah, right. You're dressing up in lingerie before your mirror at home, tucking your dick between your legs, imagining you have a vagina for a sexual kick. Oh, there's nothing sexual about that. Yeah, right. Bloody absolute liars. Now, then you have the kids who don't fit in on the gender front. That's a different pathway. But with them, if you leave them alone, so do no harm, leave them alone. 90% of them accept their body, their sex, by age 18 or 19. And 80% of them are gay. So what that also means is, and the gay community is going to wake up to this sooner or later, is that most of the kids being sterilized and mutilated are gay. 80% of them. So I don't see how the LGBT alliance is going to hold up under that sort of reality. So, yeah, that's for sure, man.
What a crazy
Yeah, and here, let's add something equally ugly to it, since we haven't gone far enough yet. So here, we'll do a little bit of arithmetic. So, a while back, Disney executive mentioned on video, this is when Florida went after Disney, it was all when this was happening. She came out and said, I think she was head of domestic programming for Disney. She said, well, I have two children, 5 and 7. One is trans and the other is pansexual. And I just thought mathematically right away, it's like the chance you have a trans kid is 1 in 3,000. That's not a very high chance. And let's say the chance that you have a pansexual kid is the same, whatever pansexual means. I don't even know how to calculate those odds. But whatever that is rarer than trans, because no one ever even heard about it until 5 years ago. So the joint probability that you have a trans kid and a pansexual kid is 1 in 9 million. The odds that you're a pathological narcissist sacrificing your own children to the glorification of your compassion is 8,999,999 to 1. So, do you have a trans kid and a pansexual kid, or are you a devouring mother? Well, you can look at the odds and decide for yourself.
Jesus.
Oh, yeah. No kidding. Look, man, Freud was no dummy when he pointed to the fact that the devouring mother was one of the major impediments to proper human development. He knew that, looking deep into the darkest families and seeing this proclivity of the overprotective mother to destroy the developing integrity of the child, to keep the child infantile, to cling to that relationship instead of developing a life for herself and letting the child go flourish. That's Hansel and Gretel, right? You're lost in the woods. Why? Well, your family's broken up. You have an evil stepmother. So now you're lost in the woods. What's your abuse rate if you have a step-parent? 100 times normal. So you're lost in the woods. Well, what happens? Well, you come across a gingerbread house. Well, that's pretty damn convenient. You need a house. It's more than you could even hope for. It's not just a house. It's a house made out of candy. Well, what's inside a house made out of candy? A witch who wants to fatten you up and eat you. And that's the devouring mother, you know, and that's an old fairy tale. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, and so, you know, we could dwell on that for a minute too. One of the things we won't honestly discuss in our society, one of many, is the fundamental nature of female political psychopathology. You know, and there's male political psychopathology, obviously. That's what the feminists complain about all the time when they talk about the oppressive patriarchy, you know, toxic masculinity. There's no shortage of toxic masculinity. So is there any toxic femininity? Well, not if the feminine is just the, you know, oppressed virgin goddess whose nature, but how about we don't live in that fantasy world? And we know, yeah, there's female political pathology, the tendency to infantilize everyone, and the tendency to assume that everyone who doesn't go along with the infantilization is properly characterized as a predator. And so, you know, you wonder, why are the universities turning into extended daycares? Well, a lot of the reason for that is that women who don't have anything better to do are turning the university students into the infants they never had. So, yeah,
Jesus.
I don't know when we'll be able to be mature enough to have that conversation. You know, 20 years from now.
What is a path to bring this back to some sort of rational, logical way of discussing these problems?
So I tweeted out, I don't know if you saw this, that I was going to make an announcement on your show today. And so I set up an international consortium based in London. I can't tell you all the details yet, but we're trying to put together something like an alternative vision of the future, say an alternative to that kind of apocalyptic narrative that's being put forward, at least implicitly, by organizations like the WEF, you know, and that's the virginal planet, rapacious tyrant, you know, all-devouring consumer religion. And it's more like something like, well, we want to ask people 6 key questions. Okay, so how do we get energy and resources at the lowest possible cost, as rapidly as possible, to the largest number of people around the world? That's one question. And so there's a presumption in the question, and here's one of the presumptions. You don't get to save the planet by making energy prices so expensive that no one poor can afford them. That's off the table. So if you want to develop alternative energy sources, no problem. You know, because, hey man, the more energy sources we have, the better. But you don't get to impose your utopian vision in the service of your narcissism on the poor. We're going to try to make the poor rich, kind of try to alleviate absolute poverty. Pro-human view on environmental stewardship front. That's the next question. What are the major problems that are confronting us? How do we take a sophisticated, multidimensional view of that? How do we prioritize our attempts to establish our states and our international relationships properly so that we prioritize human well-being, you know, in harmony with nature to the degree that's possible, but human-focused and not predicated on the idea that there are too many goddamn mouths on the planet to feed and that you're evil if you just think about having children. So then on the governance front, this is where it gets kind of more left-wing, I would say, is none of the people involved in this consortium so far are very thrilled with global corporate fascist government media and corporation collusion. You know, and we're seeing this at the high end. It's like a Tower of Babel, is that the powerful players in the world are increasingly collaborating to impose a top-down vision of the future on everyone. And that's a future that's predicated on a zero-growth model. And the idea that, well, we'd need 5 planets really to support everyone at the current standard of living that obtains in the West. So the best pathway forward is to deny loans by the World Bank to developing countries so they can't develop, you know, energy sources, which all that'll mean is they're going to burn wood and coal, obviously. So that's the third question is, you know, how do we arrange systems of governance to stop the march of something like pathological gigantism? This is why I like people like Russell Brand and also you to some degree politically, you know, because you guys are very, what would you say, sensitive to the danger of that kind of corrupt collusion, that regulatory capture that occurs when corporate entities and media entities and governmental entities are all in bed together, like the FDA and the CDC and so forth and so on without end. So that's That's the third question. The fourth question is, what do we put forward as a vision on the family policy front to facilitate the, what would you call it, the encouragement and the maintenance of long-term monogamous couples who are child-centered, and to make increasing the birth rate part of that policy, to put policies in place that would support long-term stable monogamous families, two-parent families, and child-centered. You know, because in the West, because we're very immature, we think that the purpose of a marriage is the happiness of the people who are involved in the marriage, the husband and the wife. And that's just not the purpose of marriage at all. The purpose is long-term facilitation of their psychological and spiritual development and the establishment of an environment that's beneficial to children. That's a responsible way of thinking about it. And so we need to have a serious conversation about what that means. And, you know, it's tricky because, like, I think the ideal has to be long-term committed monogamous heterosexual relationships. And I had a big conversation about this with Dave Rubin. You know, Rubin's gay and he's married, and him and his partner now have 2 infants, and we talked through how that was. It's a very hard thing for them to arrange, obviously. Why? Well, they're both male, so that poses a severe problem on the reproductive front, right? And so they manage that. They have 2 infants, but it's very complex, and it's obviously not a solution to the problem of relationship and reproduction that's duplicatable across large numbers of people. It just takes too many resources. Now, I do think we have to have an ideal at the center of every concept. But the ideal can't be too rigid, you know, because people aren't perfect. You know, in my own family, there's lots of people who are divorced. Lots of people's families, there are people who are gay. You know, there are lots of people in unhappy marriages. Nobody attains the ideal. So the ideal has to be surrounded by a fringe of tolerance, but that doesn't mean you sacrifice the ideal. And the ideal has to be, well, we know there's a literature on fatherlessness. You know, it's a bloody catastrophe, fatherlessness, for obvious reasons. You know, human children are complicated. I think you can, maybe if you struggle madly as a single parent, you could do a decent job, and lots of single parents do, but you're asking a lot, you know, for a woman to work 50 hours a week and then spend another 40 hours with her kids, and to do both of those optimally with no help. You know, and we know perfectly well that when women get divorced, especially if they have kids, they tend to fall down the economic hierarchy. So it's very difficult. So that's another one of the policies. Then another question. We're trying to make these into questions rather than, you know, we have the answer. The other question is, well, it's pretty clear that we have to live inside a story. And one story is power rules everything. That's not a very good story. It's a very pathological story. It's more like a confession, too, if that's the story you insist upon. It's like, so you think power governs everything, do you? Okay, I know what you're like. So that's what you truly believe. See, I believe the spirit of voluntary play governs everything, not the spirit of power. It's like voluntary association. That's what we're doing in this conversation. You know, we're playing towards an end, and we're doing it voluntarily, and we're taking everybody along for the ride. No one's forced to do it. So that's the other thing. No compulsion here. It's got to be invitational. And so we're trying to work out what the story has to be. And on that front, I just finished a seminar in Miami, and the first 8 parts of it were released on the Daily Wire 3 months ago. Exodus seminar. We walked through the story of Exodus. Exodus means ex-hodos, means the way forward. So it's the archetypal narrative of progression from tyranny and chaos into the future. That's what the story is. And we did half of it, released it on the Daily Wire, 8 episodes, 2 hours long. And we just recorded the last 8 sessions 2 weeks ago, and that was an absolute blast. I had really stellar people participating. Man, I learned so much. It's going to take me like 2 years to digest it. But the Daily Wire is going to release it all on YouTube for free, starting in 2 months, 1 episode a week for 16 weeks, and then we're going to keep it on YouTube and the Daily Wire for free for 4 months. And so, and it lays out a vision of appropriate governance as that's an alternative to tyranny and to chaos. So in the Exodus story, so this is very germane to the notion of what might constitute a proper story. So the question that you put forward in your life is something like, what spirit should guide you as you move ahead? And you might say, well, I don't need a spirit to guide me. It's like, yeah, you don't have that option. Some spirit guides you. Might be your stomach. Might be a worshiper of the god Priapus, right? He's the god of giant erections. That's what happens if your whole identity is staked on your sexuality. It's like some spirit is going to guide you. That's life. The question is, what is the highest spirit that could guide you? So in the Exodus story, the proposition of the story is the highest spirit that could guide you is the spirit that objects to tyranny and that calls the enslaved to freedom. That's the representation of God in Exodus. So that's what God is in the Exodus story. Now that's not all that God is in the biblical stories. That's God in the Exodus story. And so that is the God that, if you abide by that God, then you believe that tyranny is implicitly wrong, even if you tyrannize yourself, and that there's something implicitly virtuous about striving for freedom, especially if you're enslaved. So anyways, that's the voice that speaks to Moses. And the voice tells Moses to tell the Pharaoh, the tyrant, to let his people go. That's that famous line, let my people go. But the line is actually, let my people go so that they may worship me in the desert. Okay, so anyways, God, through Moses, calls the Israelites out of tyranny, and he punishes the tyrant. And so if you believe that fate punishes tyrants, you're already immersed in the Exodus story to some degree. If you believe that tyranny is implicitly wrong, because most Americans believe that. Okay, so now the Israelites leave the tyranny. You'd think, hey man, great, freedom, because now you're out of the tyranny. That isn't how life works. This is why people won't drop their tyrannical presuppositions. Because you go out of the tyranny into the desert, not to the promised land. Desert first. And what's the desert? Everyone's lost. No one knows which way to go. Everyone fights. Everyone turns to the worship of false idols. Everyone wants the tyrant to reassert himself. That's the situation we're in the aftermath of the death of God in the West. And so that's really useful to know, because one of the things you might want to know in your life is, why do people cling to their own tyrannical presuppositions? And the answer is, well, at least they're orienting structures, pathological as they might be. If you drop them, you're not redeemed, you're just lost. And the idea that being lost is freedom, that's a preposterous idea. No one lost is free. They're just enveloped in chaos. Okay, so what happens in the Exodus story is, now the Israelites are out in the desert, wandering around for like generations, and they get all fractious and fight and bitch and complain and start worshiping false idols, and they're scrapping with each other. And that's because they have the habits of slaves. They don't know how to govern themselves. And so they ask Moses to sit as a judge. And so he does. The story's very unclear about this, but for a long time, years and years, morning, dawn till midnight, he's judging the Israelites like mad, adjudicating their squabbles. And imagine what he's doing, eh? If you had to make peace between 1,000 people who were squabbling with their wife or their friends or their enemies, you have to render judgment on that. And for judgment to work, the people who are judged have to see the judgment as just, because otherwise you have to impose it by force, right? So if I hear you arguing with someone and I try to mediate, I have to come up with a solution that you'll both accept. That means I have to extract out of that chaos some principle of order. Imagine you do that 1,000 times or 5,000 times. So now you start to understand the nature of the principles of order. Okay, so now two things happen. Jethro, who's Moses' father-in-law, comes along. He's a Midianite, a foreigner. He says, you got to stop doing this. You can't sit as judge on the Israelites. There are two reasons. They need the responsibility, and you shouldn't turn yourself into another Pharaoh. So if you take all the responsibility onto yourself, you become a tyrant, and the Israelites stay slaves. So he says to Jethro, this is a signal moment in the development of Western culture, by the way. He says, you take the Israelites, you divide them into groups of 10, and you have each of the 10 elect an elder. And then you take the groups of elders, and you have them elect a meta elder, and you do that all the way up to 10,000s. And then you have the judgments that are necessary rendered at the lowest level of the hierarchy possible. So, if I'm arguing with you, first we go to our elder, and then if the elder can't figure it out, he gets the elders together, and maybe they render judgment. If they can't, it goes to the council of elders and all the way up. And if it isn't mediated by the time you have the groupings of 10,000, then Moses gets to weigh in. And that's called subsidiarity. And the idea is you have to produce a hierarchy of responsibility, distributed responsibility, as an antithesis to tyranny and to the desert. And that's the model for good governance. And that's symbolically equivalent to Mount Sinai. And it's also the model of the Ark of the Covenant and the Tabernacle. So Jonathan Pageau did a lovely job of explaining that in this. And so part of the model that we're trying to put forward in this group that I'm describing is based on this principle of subsidiarity and the idea that we want to encourage everyone to take as much responsibility as possible at the most local level possible, right? So take responsibility for yourself until you're good enough at that so you can take responsibility maybe for a wife, and then if you're good enough at that, maybe you can extend that to some kids, and then maybe you can serve your local community, and then maybe you can serve your state, and maybe if you really get good at it, you could serve your nation, right? But you're taking the responsibility, and here's the basic rule. All the responsibility you abdicate will be taken up by tyrants. That's the cardinal rule of social organization. And so we're trying to build out this story that's based on the deepest elements of Western tradition. That's an antidote to the false claim that it's only power that rules, because it's not. That's not right. And there is a model of proper governance in there. This idea of a hierarchical structure of responsibility. It's the proper computational structure. It's not top-down tyranny with fractionated individuals, and it's not utter chaos. It's ordered freedom. And that's what God tells Moses to tell the Pharaoh when he says, "Let my people go. Let my people go." No tyranny. So that they may celebrate me in the desert. It's ordered freedom. And it's the ordered freedom that comes along with being oriented towards the highest possible good. And so we're trying to work all that out now. We're going to have a conference in London, October 31st, November 1st, and November 2nd. We're going to bring about 2,000 people together. That's an invited list. We want to bring in people who are cultural figures and political figures, business figures, and invite them to this discussion. But we want to make that completely public, and we want to open up the organization to broad membership, as broad as possible. And then, if it's a success, then we'll open up the conferences as the years progress to larger and larger numbers of people. But we can't, we don't have the expertise or the wherewithal to manage that, first off. But we've got the venue already set up in London. I've got all sorts of people on board in Australia and all through Europe and through the UK and all through the United States, South America. All sorts of people are interested in participating. And so we want to help put forward a vision that's enticing and inviting. It's like, imagine you could have the world you wanted. None of this Malthusian limits to growth nonsense. Get our act together. Everyone can have it, can have enough, and maybe more than enough. There'll be enough educational opportunity for everyone. No one will be scrabbling away in the dirt, burning dung, poisoning themselves. Enough food for everyone. There's also an idea in Exodus, and this is a very good idea, that if people organize themselves properly, so they're oriented on a transcendent axis and they're oriented towards their fellow man. So you serve what's highest, and you also abide by the principle of reciprocity in relationship to other people. If we organize ourselves in that manner, there's no limit to the abundance the natural world can produce. That's the actual generator of genuine wealth, sustainable wealth. That balances order and chaos properly, that balances nature and culture properly. So the core idea is something like, you get the hierarchy of social organization right, it generates unlimited wealth. And we've already seen that to a large degree. We've lifted more people out of poverty in the last 15 years than really, it's unparalleled. 7 out of 8 billion people now have the minimum they need or something exceeding it. And instead of, starving to death by the billions, which is what everybody who was on the Malthusian side predicted back in the 1960s. So I've been working on this for a long time. I've got a good group of core people who seem to be, reliable, not motivated. We hope and pray by something approaching narcissistic egotism, and everybody's sworn to try to make this as decentralized as possible on the principle that the more responsibility you can offload to people, the better everything will work. That's a fundamentally conservative principle, like a small c conservative principle, right? So you need a hierarchy of responsibility, and you offload responsibility to the local where possible. I think it's a good principle.
Let's hold that thought because I gotta pee, and I wanna explore that.
Yep.
So, back to this thing that you're doing. First of all, what are you calling this?
I can't tell you that yet.
So you're trying to, one of the things you were saying is you're trying to generate a story.
Yeah, we're trying to invite everybody to the table. And we're trying to get the right story. And we'll know it's the right story because people will say voluntarily, yeah, I could really go for that.
What do you mean by story when you're saying the right story?
Well, a vision. Well, I would say it's something, if you want to think about it archetypally, it's something like a vision of the promised land.
A structure.
So, yeah, well, you have to, okay, we could talk about that technically. A story is a description of a hierarchy, A story is a description of a hierarchy of attentional prioritization. So what do I mean by that? There's an infinite number of things to look at in the world. So perception seems technically impossible because you just drown in the complexity. That's what happens in a psychedelic trip. You drown in the complexity. It's real, that complexity. Now, usually that's shielded from you. It's veiled from you, like God is veiled from you. It's the same thing. And so it's veiled by the fact that you regard some things as more important than others. And you do that implicitly. And so, for example, right now, you're devoting most of your cognitive and perceptual resources to my face and to what I'm saying. Right? Now, there's lots of things you could be looking at in this room or thinking about, right? There's an infinite number of things. But you're not. You're weighting some things more heavily. Now, why? Well, why are we having this conversation? Well, I could ask you, why are we having this conversation?
Because I'm curious. I want to know how you think.
Okay.
I want to know what your plans are.
What goal do you think your curiosity serves?
Better understanding of what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Why do you think other people are interested in that? Because they're going to watch this. Why do you think people are interested in that?
Because what you're saying makes sense, and we also recognize that there's a real flaw in the way our society is constructed, and there's a real genuine threat in allowing these power structures to sort of maintain this narrative and create this narrative that's based upon them gaining control over resources, our economics, our energy, and socially what we do and what we don't do.
Okay, so now
that serves them.
Okay, so do you see that partially what you're involved in insofar as you're doing it right is something like, what would you say, a cautionary tale about the possibility of tyranny?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see how that ties into an archetypal story,
certain.
right?
And I think that's the big threat. Now, that's what people are terrified of when they see Klaus Schwab standing there with a Darth Vader outfit telling people that they're going to eat bugs.
Okay, and you're using the technology of free communication as an antidote to that.
Yes.
Okay, so then I would say archetypally what you're doing is you're doing something like serving the divine word that makes habitable order out of chaos as an antidote to tyranny. That's a story. And it's a deep story. And if you weren't acting out a deep story, you wouldn't have tens of millions of people listening to it. The fact that it's like J.K. Rowling. It's like, why is she so popular? Well, she told an archetypal story masterfully. It has a religious substructure. It just got people, like hundreds of millions of people and produced billions of dollars. You have to see the world through a story. You act out a story. And the reason we like stories is because it's actually pretty hard to see the world, and it's really useful to see the world the way other people see it, just in case they know something you don't. And so we're telling each other stories all the time. We're acting out stories. A description of the pattern we're acting out, that is a story. And when you go to a movie, maybe you see the hero on the screen, it's James Bond. And that's the same the same narrative in some sense. It's, you know, it's a bit more stereotyped, but Bond is, you know, this sophisticated, aggressive guy who's got his aggression under control, who's fighting the Hydra. And it's not the Hydra in James Bond. I don't remember the name of the underground organization there, but it's a Hydra for the Marvel heroes. The Hydra is an amalgam of tyranny and chaos, right? It's a Hydra with a head of snakes. Paralyzes you when you look at it. It's an archetypal narrative. And the fundamental question of life is, what is the proper orienting narrative? That's the same question as, what God do you worship? It's the reason I entitled my next book, We Who Wrestle with God, because you're stuck with that no matter what. You're wrestling with one God or another all the time. God's an animating spirit. That's one way of thinking about it. It's more than that, but that's one way of thinking about it. And so I constantly look to these old stories, these archetypal stories, you know, as a student of Jung, let's say, to find out what the proper orienting pathway is. And that's embedded in tradition. You know, the stories that have lasted. Richard Dawkins would have got to this conclusion if he would have pursued his thought far enough. Because an archetype is a stable meme, propagates across time. And there's some memes, some stories, let's say, that stabilize you as an individual. They restrict your anxiety. They provide you with hope. They make you productive and generous. And when they're extended, they produce a structure that unites people and produces productive peace. You know, and it's not by fluke, for example, that America itself is founded in no small part on the motivational force of something like the Exodus narrative. That was certainly the case for the civil rights movement. It has to be that way because Exodus is an archetypal story about the establishment of proper order as an alternative to the tyrant and the desert. So everyone is always doing that in their life, whether they know it or not. You know, and you do it extremely well, if you don't mind the insult of a compliment. And I think the reason for that is that, for whatever reason, you are acutely aware of your own ignorance and always trying to rectify it. And I would say that's a reflection of a practice of humility. You know, I know you're a competent guy and you're no pushover, and so calling you humble is kind of a weird thing to do, but one of the things that I've been very pleased about constantly when talking to you is it's conversation, man. You know, what are we trying to do? Trying to make things clear. Trying to figure out what the hell's going on. Trying to say what we think. We're trying to jointly make each other wiser. You know, hopefully, to the degree we were able to manage it, and we're inviting people along for the ride. And they seem pretty happy about that. And that's partly because people aren't just oriented by power. You know, there's all these truckers out there who are listening to this podcast while they're driving their rigs across the country. You know, what are they trying to do? They're trying to get their acts together. They're trying to understand. You know, they're trying to take their proper position in the social world. And that's a fundamentally compelling, it's not a drive, it's an orienting and integrating spirit. It's the same as the spirit of Yahweh in the Old Testament. It's exactly the same thing. It's the same thing. So one of the things I learned about the biblical narrative, this is so cool. This is what the next book's about. So imagine there's two possible states. One of disunity and chaos. You're going in every direction at the same time, and one of relative unity. Now the unity can turn into tyranny, and the multiplicity can turn into chaos. Those are the two dangers. But imagine there's a proper unity that stops you from being anxious. Anxiety is a marker of internal disunity of narrative. And I already talked about that with this Carl Friston, for example. He's the world's most cited neuroscientist. I asked him if perceptions were micro-narratives, and he said yes. And that's quite something. That isn't how we've looked at the world for the last 3,000 years. In any case, to the degree that you're not anxious, something is uniting all the directions you could take. Okay. Now, to the degree that you're not at odds with everyone else, you know, in the chaotic state of nature where everyone's at everyone's throat, it's because there's a mode of perception and action that unites you socially. So you can be united psychologically, and you're not a house that's built on sand, and you can be united socially. Imagine there's a spirit that characterizes that unity. So the biblical corpus is an attempt to portray that spirit, and it does it using a technique called metonymy. So metaphor is something being something else. This is like that, or this is that. It's a way of taking what you know to explain what you don't know. But metonymy is a technique where you take one story that seems to have one moral and you juxtapose it with another, and maybe do that with a sequence of stories, and then there's an implication that there's a meta story that emerges across all the ordered stories. And that's what the biblical corpus is, because no one wrote it, not in any real sense. And the processes by which it aggregated are mysterious. They extend over thousands and thousands of years. But here's what the book is. It's a library, not a book. Here's what the library is. There's a proclivity towards monotheistic unity that unites us psychologically and socially. And it emerges out of a plurality of potential gods. It emerges from the bottom up. Now, you could argue that it descends from the top down too, but I'm not going to get into that at the moment. The question emerges, how do you understand that unifying, animating spirit? And the answer is, well, it's beyond our comprehension, and we can more or less approach it with a story. So here's some examples. So in the story of Adam and Eve, God is the spirit that you walk with when you're unself-conscious in a properly tended garden. You might say, well, do you believe in that? It's like, oh, do you have a garden? Most people want a garden. They want a house. They want a little fenced-off plot. They want to be able to go back there and relax and recreate, right? Unself-consciously. Okay, so whatever's happening when you're there, that's what that is. That's that. Walking unself-consciously with the spirit of the paradisal garden. So that's one picture of God. And then in the story of Cain and Abel, you have another picture, which is God is the spirit that punishes you if you make poor sacrifices. So what does that mean? It's like, well, are you giving it your all or not? Or are you playing both sides of the fence? Are you just, chipping in when you have to and trying to go along for a free ride? And that's what happens with Cain. He gets all bitter about it because his sacrifices are rejected. So God is the spirit that rejects false sacrifices. And what happens to Cain? He gets bitter and then murderous, and then his descendants become genocidal. That's the Cain and Abel story in like 2 paragraphs. So then you have the story of Noah. So in Noah, God is the spirit that calls the wise of his time, because Noah is portrayed as someone wise in his generations, right? So for his time and place, he's a wise man. He has the sense that the storms are coming and it's time to batten down the dam hatches. And so like in your own life, maybe your eyes are open to some degree and you think a storm is coming. You have an intuition that a storm is coming. Do you prepare or do you ignore that? Because those are your options. Do you prepare? Then you're manifesting faith in that spirit. So that's the spirit in Noah. In the Tower of Babel, you have God as the spirit that punishes the technological pretensions of mankind. So men get together to build a tower that stretches to the heavens. That's the Tower of Babel. And they want to do that to replace the transcendence. They want to replace the mystery of being with their own presumptions. And what happens is no one can talk to each other anymore. That's the state we're in right now. That's why Matt Walsh can make a movie that's entitled What is a Woman? Can't even agree on that. That's the Tower of Babel. And so then you have the story of Abraham, and God is presented in that story as the spirit that calls the overprotected and privileged, that's Abraham, to the adventure, to the catastrophic adventure of their life. Because that's what happens to Abraham. He's 83, he lives in his father's tent, eats peeled grapes. He doesn't have to do anything. And this voice makes itself manifest within him and says, get the hell up off your comfortable bed, get out there in the world, suffer your adventure. And Abraham's life is just, he leaves. And it's not like it's no promised land for him. It's like starvation and tyranny and war, and the Egyptian rulers conspire to steal his wife, and it's brutal life, but it's life, it's adventure. And so then you think, well, all of this is an attempt to characterize Yahweh, This is the Jewish God with whom the Jews have a relationship. All of these stories are an attempt to characterize that. So you could say, well, what is the spirit that you walk with unself-consciously in the well-tended garden, and the spirit that calls you to adventure, and the spirit that punishes tyranny? That'd be the Exodus story. What do they have in common? That's Yahweh, whatever that is. And so then there's an attempt to characterize the nature of that spirit. And then there's a twist on that in the New Testament, which is an amazing twist. It's an amazing twist, because the conclusion is that the spirit of Yahweh, portrayed in all these different ways, is the same spirit that calls people to voluntarily bear the catastrophe of their life. And that's the union of God and man. That's the idea. So it's a hypothesis. It's like, well, is that the same God? So imagine that, you're confronting your horizon of possibility and tragedy as bravely and honestly as you can. Well, that's the spirit of Yahweh making itself manifest within you. And if you do that properly, then you can bear up under that load. So that's a way better story than power. So, and it looks to me like it's looking at it psychologically, trying to strip it to the degree that it's possible of its religious overtones. You can't strip it completely, because there's an open question. Just imagine that there's a pattern of existence that quells your anxiety and gives you hope and unites people. Well, then you have an open question: is, well, how much does that reflect the structure of being itself? There's a Greek idea, the logos that's intrinsic in the world, that there's an order in the world, right, that we can discover, that makes itself manifest from the bottom up. And that's the logos of the world, the logic of the world. And it's certainly possible that the logic of the world as expressed in human existence is the same as this spirit of Yahweh that's transmuted in the New Testament into the logos. And what happened, I did a lecture about this at Ephesus in Turkey. That was fun, which was where the logos was discussed 3,000 years ago, the Greek logos. So what you have in Western culture is you have this Greek idea that there's an intrinsic order in the universe, bottom up sort of. And then the Christians come along and say, well, there's also an intrinsic order in the psychological realm. And then Western culture is the juxtaposition of those two, the claim that those are the same thing. And so that would be the same claim as if you honestly and truthfully confront the tragic limitations of your life, you'll discover the truth of the implicit order, and that will redeem you. And that's the fundamental claim of science, for example. So even science, insofar as it's a practice, is embedded in this tradition. So, well, it's a way better story. It's the greatest story ever told, man.
And this idea that you're putting together, how do you go about structuring something like this? And how do you go about getting people to agree upon the parameters and how it should be implemented?
Well,
it seems like
kind of figure
massive undertaking.
You figure it out as you go. Well, I'll tell you what's happened.
Okay.
Just because some of it's already happened. So I was traveling through Eastern Europe last year to all these countries that had been communist not that long ago. And I was fortunate because I was meeting like 30 to 50 people in each country. I had a team of people who were setting up meetings for me of cultural and political leaders in each country. So I'd have dinner with them or an event, and talk to everybody, and I was listening to what their concerns were. And throughout Eastern Europe, it was the same concern. And the concern was, what the hell are you guys toying with in the West? This woke neo-Marxism. They're terrified of that in Eastern Europe because, it was just 1989, not that long ago. They said, I don't know what you guys are doing. Don't you know where that goes? Very pro-American, by the way, all through Eastern Europe. Unbelievably pro-American. And everybody that I met said, we're really afraid of what's happening in the West.
Can I pause you there for a second? When you say pro-American, what do you mean by that? What about
They think
America?
the fundamental ethos of the U.S. is reliable.
What is that fundamental ethos, you think?
I think it's the logos fundamentally. But, if you differentiated that, one of the things that's really quite amazing about the US, and I think it's unique, really, is that your society is fundamentally not envious. Now, there's plenty of envy in it, because that's hard to eradicate, but one thing about you Americans is you're actually capable of admiring success, and you're capable of trying to replicate it for yourselves and your children, and you actually celebrate that.
Well, we think it's possible, but there's not a caste system.
That's a
here.
faith.
Yes.
It's a faith. You believe that that's, not only do you believe that that's possible, you believe that it's appropriate.
Yes.
And that's the American dream.
And it's celebrated.
And celebrated. And that's no different than worshipped fundamentally. Like that, the difference between those words is like systematic.
And so that is what is attractive.
Yeah. Well, partly too, because you remember, like, one of the countries I went to visit was Albania. And Albania was the worst of the Soviet countries. And that's a hard contest to win. Like, there are caverns all over Albania that the government dug out because the whole story there was Albania was the richest, most desirable country in the world, and they were absolutely surrounded by enemies. It was like the ultimate paranoid totalitarian states, and they're not very happy about the devastation that wreaked for 60 years. And they look to the West, to the best part of the West, and think, God, don't lose that, guys. Like, we had the totalitarian utopia, and it wasn't. I wouldn't recommend it. So I'm going through all these countries, and people are telling me this concern they have. And then they also say, well, we feel like we're voices crying in the wilderness, like we're concerned about the direction of the culture war, let's say. But if we say anything about it, we get taken out by the mob. But then I went to like 14 countries, and everyone said the same thing. And I thought, well, if the same thing is happening in 14 countries, you're not a voice crying in the wilderness, you're just people who aren't communicating very well with each other. So I thought, well, why isn't there an international organization that's really centrist, that would attract traditionalist, small c conservatives and classic liberals alike? We don't want the ultra-nationalist types because they go off the deep end in one particular way, and the radical leftist globalist utopians who are under the grip of the Marxist idea. That's a very small minority of people. There's a huge number of people in the reasonable middle, but they don't seem to. They've abdicated their responsibility. That's a good way of thinking about it. So then I started talking when I went through Europe. I said, well, I'm thinking about organizing a convention where I could bring people together to talk about a different vision, and also maybe to share specific policy ideas that worked. Right? So that's more concrete. And everyone I talked to said, I'd really be interested in that. I'll change my schedule. I'll do everything I can to help. And that just happened in every country. And so I thought, well, that's weird, because this is a preposterous idea. And what should happen is that people, maybe they're pleased to meet me and they give some lip service to the idea, and it just ends there. That's the destiny of most ideas. That isn't what happened. Then I went to the UK and started talking about it, and exactly the same thing happened. People were just like, sign me up, man, what can I do? Then I went to Washington. I talked to the Republican Study Committee about this, and they make policy for the Republicans, and the same thing happened. A whole bunch of Republicans came up and said, we'll change our schedule, make sure you have the conference at some time when the House isn't sitting so we can attend. Is there anything I can do to help? And I realized then, the conservative types, they're pretty good at implementing. They're pretty good incremental movers because they're conscientious, but they're not very good at vision. And so they get reactionary, and what happens on the Republican side is they're always pointing to the left saying, you go too far, but there's no vision. So it's hard for them to attract young people. It turns out if you put forward something that approximates an invitational vision, they're just all over that, like no time flat. So then how to implement it? Well, we got together a group of people in London twice, a very diverse group of people, and we hashed out these 5 questions that I presented to you, and everyone basically agreed, despite a wide range of political opinions in the room, said, yeah, those seem to be the key questions. And then we figured out that we needed to put this forward as an invitation and not as a top-down, compulsion-based, you have to do this or the planet's going to be doomed. It has to be an invitation. And so And now we're trying to work out the details. And well, the first real move will be to open this up to public participation, to figure out how to do that, to get a dialogue going, but then also to have this conference October 31st, November 1st, and November 2nd in London. And I plan to do 3 lectures at night there, one on the crisis of the West, one on environmental stewardship, and one on metaphysics. Public lecture to kind of anchor the convention. We've got, I think, the Apollo in London already set up for that. And, and our goal, God willing, is that we develop a vision that everyone says, yeah, I'm in, what can I do? Instead of the vision being, you're emitting too much carbon dioxide there, buddy, and enough cars and comedians for you. Yeah. So we'll see. But the thing that's been striking is how rapidly this came together and how motivated people were to participate. We had people from Australia, for example, who have lots to do, the people who came. They flew all the way from Australia for a 2-day meeting 3 weeks ago to discuss this. They were only there for 2 days. People came from Washington and from all over Europe. It's weird. But I think the reason is, and this, is that the people perish for lack of vision. Absolutely. And this vision we're being offered is this dire, bloody apocalypse. And, we have to limit our consumption. We have to make energy expensive. Everyone can't have enough. We have to accept limits. There's too many people on the planet. We have to run around like frightened tyrants to clamp everything down. It's like, all that's doing, it's demoralizing young men like mad. Young people aren't even having relationships anymore, because especially the men, if they're not bloody patriarchal tyrants, they're virgin raping planetary despoilers. It's like, what kind of vision is that for young men? It just makes them sick. And I've seen plenty of that. But people are so grateful if you provide them with an alternative that says, that ambitious striving that you have within you, that's something that's making itself manifested in the optimal way as something that's the highest, not just a manifestation of your tyrannical, patriarchal, rapacious nature. That's what we tell young men, like non-stop from the time they're 3 onward. And then what, Then they're all timid shells of themselves, embarrassed about everything they want and do. They don't even have enough spine to approach a woman and try to establish a relationship. They're in love with Tinkerbell the porn fairy instead. It's horrible. And so we're hoping to put forward a vision that's an invitation, to the table. And with the idea that we got our act together, especially given our technological power, God only knows what sort of world we can build. But definitely one where there was enough for everybody, enough of everything basic and enough opportunity, education, resources. I'm working with Bjorn Lomberg on this, so I'm very happy about that, because Bjorn, he's the real thing, He's done the work. So that's very good to have him on board.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to him.
Yeah. I got a couple other projects on the way. I'll tell you
How
about
could
them.
you have time for other projects if you're doing this?
Subsidiary organization. I got a lot of people around me who are doing their work, So if I don't micromanage, provide people with maximal autonomy and try to get committed people, can distribute the effort, which you have to, as much as possible, and then who knows what's possible. So I'm working with my son. We have this app called Essay, which we launched back in November, that teaches people how to write while they use it. We just developed dark mode for that. That was released this week. We got about 8,000 subscribers on that.
Dark mode meaning?
Dark mode, you can use it at night without blinding yourself. And so it teaches you how to write while using it. It's word processing, but it teaches you how to write and to think, because if you learn to write, you learn to think. And it teaches you how to edit. Concentrate on each word, to evaluate every phrase, to evaluate every sentence, to evaluate the organization of sentences within paragraphs, and paragraphs within sequence properly within the essay, and to think about how to produce a set of thoughts and then how to critically evaluate them. So that's fun. That's going very well. We have, like I said, about 8,000 subscribers now, and about 80,000 users. And so that's a good project because we'd like to teach 1 million people to write. I think the ordinary person, if they used essay instead of a standard word processor, the first thing they wrote would be the best thing they ever wrote, right off the bat. Because we built the tools right into the software, like it steps you through the process of writing.
How so?
Well, one of the features, for example, is so imagine that you want to write about something, whatever it is. The first question is, well, what problem are you trying to solve? What's the question here? And then there's an injunction in the documentation. If the question that you're trying to solve doesn't grip you, then you're starting the whole bloody thing off with a lie. Like, it has to be something you care about. It has to be something that grips you. So it has to be a question you want the answer to, like the questions you ask in the podcast. And then what? Well, then you write down what you think. And if you don't know enough, go read. And then write down what you think. And don't worry about ordering it. Just get it down. And then it steps you through. It's like, okay, here's a paragraph. You'll break the paragraph into sentences. Now, here's a little box that opens up. Write 5 variants of the sentence. Shorten it, make it more concise. Write 5 variants that makes that sentence precise. When you get a better sentence, hit click and it'll snap it to the essay. Then there's another module that helps you move the sentences around. So here's your paragraph. Well, maybe there are too many sentences in it and the sentences aren't in the right place. Order the sentences so that each paragraph is like a little coherent essay. And so then do the same thing with the paragraph. You run through them. So we ask people, separate production from editing. Get the question right. Do your research. Separate production from editing. Overproduce, then edit. Edit for words. Did you use the right word? Is every word the right word? Is every phrase the right phrase? Are the phrases organized into proper sentences? Are the sentences sequenced properly? So that's the editing. There's no difference between that really and critical thinking. So that's the essay app. And I used that process for my students, earlier iterations of this, and by the 3rd draft of the essays they wrote, they were the best essays they ever wrote in their life. Like, this actually works. It's how I write, by the way, for whatever utility that might be. It is how I write. I tried to formalize that. And then with my daughter, Michaela, I've started this Peterson Academy, and our plan is a funny plan. We want to drive the cost of a bachelor's degree down to $4,000. And so we've got 30 professors on board so far. I've been able to identify stellar lecturers from all over the world. We bought a studio in Miami. We have the professors come there. We try to be very hospitable and to treat them well, which doesn't generally happen at universities, by the way. And they lecture they give 4 2-hour lectures on whatever they really want to teach about. And they have a lot of autonomy. We're not constraining them. It says the rule is we'll put an audience together for you in the studio. We want you to teach what you love at the edge of your ability. And we'll offer that to as many people as we possibly can. We're pursuing accreditation through a variety of different avenues. So we hope to be able, what we'll do is take 2 or 3 of those 8-hour lectures, bundle them together. That'll give you 1 university credit. We want to get actual credit for it. And then we're planning as well, we hope. So imagine we charge tuition, and we'll try to keep that low cost. Like I said, we want to knock the cost of the whole degree down to $4,000. That's 95% reduction in cost. That's the plan. And then if you're in the developed world, we'd like to offer you the opportunity to pair yourself with a student in the developing world who couldn't afford it, and we'll give them the opportunity for free, but they'll be like your partner. So that should produce some interesting partnerships between people, but also give people who don't have access to high quality university level education a real in. And we are talking to some different institutions, mortar and brick institutions, about how accreditation might be pursued and how we can partner with them to also offer people other elements of the university experience that you can't easily virtualize. And we've developed a good app that adds a social component to it so that people can discuss the lectures while they're watching them, and can make social contacts and maybe have meetup groups in different cities. So we want to universalize higher education, and then we're gonna set the grading system in stone. So the grade you'll get for this university will be your performance. So there'll be no grade inflation. So what we're hoping to is that we're going to also, amalgamate it with this essay program so that all our graduates will be able to write. We're hoping that a degree from this university will indicate to employers a true level of competence. So that's the plan. We've got, like I said, we have 30 professors on board already. I recorded 3 lectures for it now. One on the Sermon on the Mount, so that was very fun. One on, it'll be a 2-part one, but I did the first half of Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. And I did a 8-hour summary of my book, Maps of Meaning. And so we have all sorts of other people who are, from Cambridge and Oxford and Stanford and MIT. And then people from outside the academy too, who are brilliant. Jonathan Pageau just did a series on symbolic thought. He's absolutely brilliant. Deepest religious thinker I've ever met. Old Testament prophet, man. Something to see. So we're going to roll that out, we hope, in November. And, I'm working with the Daily Wire, and that seems to be going great too. They've been great partners. They leave me the hell alone. I can still do my YouTube channel and offer it for nothing. I do some extra work for them behind the scenes. Do a 30-minute interview after my YouTube interviews and put that behind the paywall. And I've done a bunch of documentaries for them, some on Western civilization. They've been really good partners. Like I said, they leave me alone and they help me. That's a pretty good deal. So, and my wife and I are cruising all around the world, doing these lectures all the time. That's fun. It's ridiculously entertaining. And she's getting really good at it too. She opens the show. She usually tells about a 10-minute story about one of the rules from my latest book. Ties that in with her life. She's getting to be a real good public speaker. So that's really fun. She's got a good comedic touch. And my son's going to tour with us starting on the 30th. He's a musician. I've had a musician, David Cotter, open my shows for the last 30 lectures, and he plays classical and guitar. So he does a 20-minute set while everyone's coming in to sit down, and so that kind of sets a nice tone for the lecture. And then we do this exploration of an idea, and I do a Q&A with my wife after the lectures. But
it's an amazing amount of things you're doing. Like, how do you have this energy? Like, where are you getting all the energy to do all this stuff? It's got to be overwhelming.
Well, I'm not sick anymore.
That helps.
Yeah.
Well, you seem
this is by far the best
better.
I've ever felt.
Yeah, you seem better now than you were even when I saw you a while ago.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I've never done an interview with you where I was healthy.
Wow.
Like the best I ever got with you was about 60%. So I'm up about 80% now.
You seem great.
Higher.
You seem
Much
like
better
completely there.
Much better. Well, it's hard to be completely there. And
Whatever
there are
that
people
means.
who would debate that.
Right. Sure.
But the lectures, it's such an adventure. It's so crazy. It's so positive. I don't talk about political things much at the lectures. I'll make a joke now and then, that's about it. But mostly it's metaphysical exploration, exploration of narrative, I would say. People come there because for the same reason they listen to you, We're trying to figure something out.
Yeah. Well, there's a deep hunger for that. Because there are a lot of people that don't feel served by the narrative they're being fed.
Yeah.
And they also don't feel like there's anyone around them that they aspire to.
Yeah.
There's no one around them that seems to be living a life that looks satisfying or rewarding or attractive.
Yeah. And that's more, so one of the things, so I was doing a different lecture every night for about 70 minutes and then doing a Q&A, and that was wearing me out. Because it was sort of like writing a whole book chapter every night, because I really want to do something different. And, I draw from stories that I've aggregated. It's not like 100% new content, but it's like variations on a theme. And that was wearing me out. So Tammy suggested at one point that we just try a straight Q&A. And that doesn't take as much preparation. And I kind of like the pressure of having to spontaneously answer. And people liked that just as much. And so that made it a bit more sustainable. But what was also cool, and we didn't realize this, people like to see her and I interacting, and that was a real revelation to us both, because we were doing it more for reasons of necessity. knowing that people would like the Q&As, but it simplified things. And because we're, I don't know how many shows we did last year, 200 maybe, like a lot, all over the place. So it's
Akira.
Man, it's time to get to the next venue and be prepared. So it was tiring. But one of the things that happened was that people seemed really pleased to see us interacting. And we realized that there's a lot of people out there who never really had a good model of couples communication ever. And that's pretty sad, So, yeah, there's plenty of wandering around in the desert.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you something else that's cool. When I first did this back in 2018, did a meet and greet after, and I'd say a third of the people were in pretty bad emotional distress. Often when they came to meet me after the lectures, they were in tears, or they had some pretty brutal story to relate, and it was pretty emotionally grueling to see that night after night. And now there's way more women who come, there's way more couples, and the guys are way more put together. So that's pretty cool. And lots of them, especially the ones that get the meet and greet tickets, they've been listening for 5 or 6 years. They've really been trying to put their lives together. And so most of the stories I hear now are stories like, I was in a pretty rough place, but I started my life together, and now I have this girlfriend, and we're getting married, or we're just having our first child, and now I have a business, and here's what I'm doing that's really working, and they're all standing up, and half of them are in suits or 3-piece suits, and that's something, man. That's partly why we keep doing it, Tammy and I. It's like, it's so positive. I think, well, why wouldn't you keep doing that?
That's an overwhelming responsibility too, right? Like the feeling behind that you've had this enormously positive impact on these people's lives, and then that's not something you set out to do as a person. Like, this is almost something that was thrust upon you as an adult. You became very famous as a professor who was, fairly anonymous. You're just teaching, and then all of a sudden you've been thrust into the public conversation worldwide.
Yeah. Well, it's some of it's what would you say? It's utterly unpredictable, and it's utterly surreal and entirely predictable, both at the same time, because I knew that what I was dealing with when I was working at Harvard, when I was writing Maps of Meaning, I knew that there was something about that was core. I knew it. And I could tell partly because of the effect it was having on my students when I was teaching, because I was watching that. And the typical comment from my course evaluation was, this course changed the way I looked at everything. And that's a pretty radical claim. And, I had 20 years of that, practicing doing that. And then I started lecturing on TV Ontario, because my classes were popular, and that got an audience. And then, I had a pretty big corpus of work online by the time I objected to Bill C-16. And then, well, that brought a huge audience in, partly for the scandal that I had all that content. So they came for the scandal, but stayed for the content. But there is an element of predictability to it, because I am a clinician, so I'm interested in helping people. And that's a deep interest, And part of that's curiosity, and part of that's fear of hell, I would say, so to speak. I've always been interested in being an educator. I like lecturing. I like having students. And so, I'm a clinical educator. And then I started playing with YouTube. And turned out that could scale, And then there's this hunger for a uniting narrative that, was identified by people like Carl Jung, 60 years ago. So there's an element of it in some way that's inevitable. God died, that's Nietzsche's pronouncement. Well, that sets up a certain kind of stage, a certain kind of hunger. It's the hunger for the revivification of the dead father in archetypal terms. And that's responsibility, most fundamentally. It's discipline. That's the sort of thing Jocko pushes, and you too, to a large degree. Because young men, they're clamoring for disciplined responsibility, weirdly enough. And you can't offer that if you think that all male activity is just toxic masculinity, But you're wise enough to know that's not true. And so I saw Jocko last night, by the way, so that was last night or the night before. So that was quite fun.
There's a thing that men need They need difficult tasks, and they need to know that they can overcome difficult tasks. And through that, you develop your human potential. You develop what you're capable of doing. And if you don't encounter those things in life, you remain feeble. And you may...
Fetal even.
Yeah, and very, not just immature, but insecure.
Well, and not just insecure, but insecure.
Get after
Then bitter.
Yes.
Then resentful.
Yes.
Then dangerous.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. The alternative, like
Get after it.
weak, insecure, bitter men are not harmless.
No.
Quite the contrary.
And they try to damage people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they try to damage people oftentimes because in comparison to those people they're trying to damage, they feel they come up short. They don't like it. They don't like the feeling, and they try to destroy the thing that makes them feel bad.
That's Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because in the biblical story, that's the first story about human beings, right? Because Adam and Eve are made by God. They don't count. The first two human beings are fratricidal brothers engaged in a war of envy that degenerates into the flood and the Tower of Babel. It's stunning. It's stunning.
It's so relatable. I mean, if you are a person that, strives to work hard and accomplish things and you have grand ambitions, you will find so many people that try to destroy that.
Yeah, but I mean, what's your life like when you go out in public?
People are friendly.
How often?
Mostly. 99% more than 99%.
Right.
But I'm friendly.
Yeah, I know, but still, it's remarkable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because you're an axis of contention online, but I mean, you're very good at handling people. I've watched how you treat people, but it is the case that when you go out in public, I mean, how many bad encounters have you had with people in public?
Very few. Very, very few.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same with me.
Yeah.
And
but
so
it's also like when I'm in public doing my things, I mean, either in
what
public,
if you're just walking around on the street, though?
people are friendly.
Yeah. And I suspect that's true wherever you go.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's so interesting, because there are people who are motivated, at least in part, and sometimes almost completely by envy. But most people aren't like that, and even the people who are like that mostly aren't like that 100%.
Right, that's the thing, right? Is that people are different depending upon the circumstances. And I think most of the people that you would even interact with negatively online, if you choose to interact with them at all, but most of the people that will post things negatively about you online, if you could be alone with them and have a conversation with them, just a one-on-one conversation where you could find common ground.
Oh, most student activists, if you went to their parents' house for dinner with them, you'd think, well, that kid's like 85% like every other kid.
Yeah.
That's a good way of thinking about it too, because if you don't understand this, you get conspiratorial. So imagine there's a system of ideas. We were talking about the system of ideas that might motivate some of the WEF, top-down shenanigans. And we talked about the religious substrate and the idea that the planet has too many people on it. It's not like there's anybody there who's fully possessed by those ideas. It's the ideas have a relationship that's part and parcel of the set of ideas. And each person is a partial carrier of those ideas. But if you get 200 people in a room who are partial carriers of that set of ideas, you've got the whole set of ideas there, and that's an animating spirit. Then it acts like a conspiracy. And that isn't to say that there aren't sometimes also actual conspiracies, but it's very useful to separate out the conspiratorial nature of a set of dynamic ideas from the people who are partial carriers of the ideas. So Carl Jung said at one point, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. And there's a religious idea that's reflective of that the cosmos is a battle between principalities. So that'd be like a battle between spirits. And there's a real truth in that, because the culture war we're in right now is a battle of systems of ideas. This is why what's happening on the conservative front, say in Florida, has some danger. It's like, well, we want to ban CRT. It's like, well, that's a war that has to be waged in the realm of the abstract. It has to be waged in, metaphorically in heaven. It's not, as soon as you concretize it, you fall prey to the same pathology. You'll end up enabling censors.
It has to be debated.
Yeah, it has to be
discussed.
It has to be thrashed out in the realm of ideas. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't defeat bad ideas. I don't think you can defeat bad ideas with law. You have to defeat bad ideas. I think you have to defeat bad ideas with a better vision, actually. I don't even think you can defeat bad ideas in some sense.
Right.
Because there's always the danger that while fighting them, you turn into a monster. You know, what's that Nietzschean statement? If you gaze too, don't forget that when you gaze into an abyss, that the abyss also gazes into you, and that someone who spends all their time fighting monsters can easily turn into a monster themselves.
Well, isn't it also that there's different people at different stages of their lives that will adopt these ideas because they seem the most attractive at the time? And it doesn't necessarily mean that that person will hang on to that their whole life. And oftentimes people shed terrible ideas that they've adopted early in their life because they've recognized the flaws. And the only way to recognize
everyone's like that, who doesn't get ossified, you know?
Right. And the only way to recognize those flaws is to have those flaws exposed to you.
Yeah.
You have to have conversations.
They have to be honest conversations.
And you have to have the ability to analyze them.
Yeah, well, what happens, when you have an honest conversation that's engrossing is that you're actually optimizing abstract death. So, maybe your head's full of stupid ideas. Why are they stupid? You go act them out and you die. So that's why they're stupid, or you suffer. And so what you hope happens is you can kill off those ideas before they possess you to the point where you act them out. So what do? You go test them in conversation. And hopefully, you and I, we've been talking all day, and hopefully the consequence of that is that we both come away from this discussion somewhat less stupid and blind than we were. And the reason that happened is because each of us have let go of some presumptions that were tyrannical. Not enough to, if you lose your whole system of belief, it just takes you out. You're in the desert, but you can do that optimally. So just the right amount of you is dying. Then you have to do that to sustain your life, because to sustain your life biologically, parts of you are dying all the time. Like unrestricted growth is just cancer, right? So you have to optimally die all the time to live. And it's the same on the idea front. And you experience optimal death and growth in meaningful conversation. You can do that while thinking too, but most people think by talking. In fact, thinking is internalized talking.
Yes.
So most people think by talking.
That's one of the dangers of podcasts. You're thinking out loud.
Yeah. Well, but it's also one of the things that makes it exciting, right? Because if it's real, then people are along for the... And it's cool because I kind of do the same thing in my lectures. I don't prepare my lectures. I have a question in mind that I'm trying to answer. Then I go on stage and I try to answer the question or investigate the question at least, and as I've got better at it, usually what happens is I go a bunch of different places and then I can snap it together at the end, and that's fun. It's like all these plates are in the air and you just bring them all together at the end. It's like the final punchline of a comedian set.
Exactly like that.
Yeah, it is. It's exactly like
when bits are constructed.
It's like a callback.
And that's what you're trying to do when you're constructing bits. You're trying to figure out how to tie it together optimally.
Well, to dispense with what's unnecessary, right? To get to the gist and to tie it together. And it's so fun when you can land on your feet. I've been watching Tammy do this when she's learning how to tell a story on stage, and her stories are about 10 minutes long. She has an opening, here's the problem set, and then she lays out some narrative and says, well, here's, how we could explore this, and now and then she can go and snap.
It's nice.
Oh, it's so nice.
Yeah.
It's like you got to the point.
Yeah.
And the point, that's the direction. That's the moral of the story.
Yeah.
Jokes do that all the time.
Yeah.
So
that's the goal.
I think the closest thing to what I do on stage is probably what stand-up comedians do. Although you guys usually run through a prepared set, but you have a universe of potential jokes, right? And my suspicions are that you're watching how the audience is reacting and crafting what you're selecting to bring everybody on board. And you want to tell a story that has a narrative arc and it comes to a conclusion. Have you noticed in your podcast that if you're really paying attention to the dialogue, that the podcast has a narrative arc all by itself?
Yes.
It's so cool,
Yeah.
That you'll see, we're halfway done, and then, now here's the natural ending.
Yes.
So, and that's cool that narrative emerges just as a consequence of focused attention, but it's definitely the case.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's a very fascinating way to explore life publicly. Right? It's a very fascinating way to explore life publicly and allow other people to take in some of these thoughts and form their own.
yep,
Because that's what a lot of people are doing.
Yeah.
They're listening to this and they're actually thinking about various aspects that resonate with their own life,
Yeah.
and then applying their own unique view of the world to that.
yep.
And and seeing how they could maybe use it to enhance them, or whatever they disagree on, why they disagree on it,
Yeah.
and solidify that position in their
Yeah,
mind
well,
as well.
and the good podcast does two things at least. It presents people with some new information, which is part of why I love doing podcasts. Like, it's such a privilege, and you know this perfectly well, to call anybody in the world up and say, hey, I'm pretty curious about this.
Right.
And you look like you know more about that than anyone else in the world. Would you like to talk about it? And then they
Yes.
say yes. It's like, oh, that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
And so you get to have that experience of learning, but at the same time, you can model the exploration of ideas.
Yeah.
And so then people, they learn two things. They learn whatever the facts of the matter are, let's say, but they also learn how to conduct an exploratory dialogue. And both of those, if you can learn those both at the same time, that's perfect.
Right.
And that's really, you're basically using the Socratic method of instruction, right? Because the Socratic method was all inquiry. So, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? Like, you're not asking the audience, but you are essentially, because you're a proxy for the audience. It's like, I don't know what this means. Do you want to explain it?
Well, oftentimes I am too, because I might know what the answer is, but I have to ask it anyway,
Yeah.
because I want other people to know it.
Right.
So instead of saying it, I have to ask.
Yeah.
And I have to, and also it's like, I want to know how people think and how they come to these conclusions, which is really fascinating in and of itself, because everyone's path to whatever their own conclusions are very different.
Yes. Well, one of the things you learn in therapy as a therapist is you can't really provide people with the answer. So maybe, someone will come to me with a set of problems and I'll think, well, I know how to solve that. I could just tell them. But what happens if you tell them is they just don't do it.
Right.
So what you want to do is you want to ask them a bunch of questions about the problem and about what they might view as a hypothetical solution. And then they develop the intermediary steps along the way to the conclusion. Then they're actually likely to act it out. Same thing happens with kids. You have to walk people through the process. And, a lot of what we both do, I think, in our podcast is we invite people along for the ride. Instead of presenting a package of pre-programmed options.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You get that a bit because you select the people you talk to, but you can't talk to everyone, and you're going to have a viewpoint. So that's, as long as you're not playing games with that or any more than than you can avoid.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, for me, this has been like an unexpected education in a very bizarre way. When I first started doing it, I didn't think I was going to get educated. I thought I was just going to have fun with my friends and fuck around. Mm-hmm. And then along the line, bringing guests on, then it just sort of evolved on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
I often think that this thing made itself.
Yeah.
As bizarre as that sounds.
Well, okay, yes and no, eh? It made itself in some way, but you followed the golden thread of what was meaningful and interesting, and that is a spirit. That's the golden thread that leads you out of the maze, and something, you'll be conducting a podcast and something will grip you. You think, oh, there's something there. And then maybe if you're awake and aware, then you start doing more of that, and that has a life. So that's what happens in the story of Exodus when Moses encounters the burning bush. Because it's a bush, eh? It's not an oak tree that's 300 feet tall.
Right.
It's just a bush. And so the story goes, Moses is walking along and something catches his eye. He didn't have to go over and look. It catches his eye and he thinks, what the hell's that? And then he goes over and he starts to pay attention. And the more he pays attention, the more the voice of God manifests itself to him. That's what that story means. Is, so something catches your interest and glimmers, then that's the gold beckoning in the distance. It captures your interest. And then if you pursue that, like, it leads you into the depths.
I don't know if we've talked about this before, but what do you think about those scholars in Israel that believe that the burning bush was some sort of a psychedelic experience?
Oh, well, I think we have no idea how psychedelic experience shaped religious presumption.
Have you read Brian Murarescu's
work? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I interviewed him. Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, look, we know that the shamanic tradition, which is God only knows how many tens of thousands of years old. It might be, is it millions of years old? Maybe. Human beings have been using fire for 2 million years. It could be really, really old. And the shamanic tradition is definitely a psychedelic tradition. And one of the things Murarescu did was show quite clearly that all of Greek culture was embedded in what looks like a collective psychedelic experience. And so, yeah, I think the evidence, like Mircea Eliade, a great religious scholar, studied shamanism, and he thought that the use of psychedelics was a degeneration of the original tradition, but I don't think that's true at all. I think that the psychedelic tradition is part and parcel of the universal religious heritage of mankind. I don't know what that means. I've talked to people like Robin Carhart Harris, who studies the neurology of psychedelic experience, and he said that what it does is produce something akin to a hyper stress experience. So imagine you're extremely stressed, like your life's in danger, and so you have to open yourself up to the possibility of radically new ideas. Well, a psychedelic substance puts you in that state of mind, and so that can be hellish, because you can collapse into like a catastrophic fight or flight defensive response, and magnified by the hallucinogen, and you're just in hell. But that isn't the only necessary outcome. And so the psychedelic experience definitely mimics something like radical learning, and it also seems to reduce the effect of memory on perception, because most of what you see in the world is memory. It's just that's why, when you look at a printed word, you read the word. You can't not read the word. And that's because you're seeing the memory. You're not seeing, like when I look at the sign behind you, I'm not lost in the yellow and the details. I see the Joe Rogan experience. Right? Part and parcel of perception. It's all memory. What a psychedelic does, in part, is remove the inhibition of memory from perception. And that re-immerses you in the complex world and shows you how remarkable and beyond comprehension everything really is. That's real. But the question is what to do with that. Timothy Leary, his doctrine was turn on, tune in, drop out. And that devastated the whole culture, that idea. It's like, well, if we just shed our presuppositions and the whole industrial nightmare, we'd all be freedom-loving hippies wandering around in Eden. It's like, no. I wanted to do a line of psychedelic products. Turn on, tune in, grow up. Right. I think that's much funnier, much better.
Yeah, and that's also possible. That's a possible path through this sort of quest for spiritual enlightenment.
Yeah.
And the Timothy Leary thing was, it was dismissed by a lot of other psychedelic pioneers of the time. They saw the flaws.
Oh yeah, definitely. The people who were already experimenting with ideas of proper set, and also they knew that back in the early 60s.
Yes. And also the people that had no desire to run a group of like-minded people, which Leary did. He wanted to...
he fell into that hippie culture, that hippie counterculture.
Also, I think he fell into the cult of personality. He fell into this thing that happens when too many people are paying attention to you.
Yeah.
And you think you have all the answers.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous.
Yeah, especially if you combine that with psychedelic
experience. Yes.
That turns out to be a problem.
Right, and the intoxicating grip of that, the power that you have over these people, which is it's unavoidable. And if you are a guru, air quotes, and you're the person doing that, like how many of them just start cults? And how many of them, it winds up being sexual?
Well, Jung was asked once to comment on psychedelic experience. I think he was asked about what Huxley was doing, and Jung's answer was, beware of unearned wisdom. Right. Very smart.
Very smart.
They're very, very smart.
Yeah. Unearned wisdom. Almost all wisdom comes at a price and a long road to get to that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Right. It's not a quick fix. There's no quick fixes. This idea that you're just going to trip balls and figure it all out.
Yeah, and then you've got it. No, that's no.
No, and everyone that I know that thinks they've figured it out are the most lost.
Yeah.
They're, especially the ones that are
if you're lucky,
espousing
you
it
can
to
come
other
out of an
people.
experience like that knowing that, like Socrates, and Socrates may have learned this from psychedelic experience. Seems quite probable because he participated in the Eleusinian mysteries.
Yes.
He said, I know that I don't know. He was radically open to the revelation of his own ignorance, and certainly psychedelics can provide that. It's like, oh, I see. I don't have a clue.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the first step.
Yeah.
That's the first lesson you learn is you don't know shit.
Yeah.
And also the overwhelming understanding that this is available, that this experience is available, and it's so alien to modern experience, and just an average everyday experience, that this thing is
behind the veil, man.
Yeah, and it's right there. And it's so scary for people.
Yeah, well, maybe this time, there are wise people working on that front, like Roland Griffiths, who unfortunately is very sick at the moment. And, he's approached this with a lot more reverence and respect than more casual experimenters like Leary. And maybe this time, God willing, we'll get it right and introduce these strange ancient chemicals back into our culture without blowing the lid right off it.
Right, and I think one of the best gateways to that is dealing with people who have trauma. Soldiers with PTSD, where they're doing MDMA therapy, and also other people that have had violent experiences in their life with MDMA.
Yeah.
It's helped them to overcome that.
Griffiths has helped people deal with, paralyzing death anxiety consequential to cancer diagnosis.
Yes.
And those studies, they're very dry. We gave psilocybin to a group of people who were suffering from cancer, and their relationship with death radically transformed. The implication is somehow that's a chemical transformation, and of course to some degree it is, because it was induced by a chemical, but there's a mystery there. It's like, well, what happened to those people in that 6 hours that transformed their vision of death, right?
Yeah. And what happens?
There's a bit of a mystery there.
During the most profound psychedelic experiences, are you actually in the presence of God? I mean, are there moments during those things where you kind of see it? That the veil does get lifted, and you do briefly for a moment.
Yeah.
And
I think the same thing happens to you to some degree when you fall in love. Like when you're in love with your kids. Well, you see them better than you've ever seen anyone.
Yeah.
You see deeper into them than you've ever seen into anyone.
Yeah.
So love is the partial lifting of that veil of ignorance.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of romantic love too, is you see into the soul of the other person, so to speak. You see what they could be.
Yeah.
That's and they see what you could be, and you fall in love with that possibility. And that's not a delusion. It's not a chemical delusion. It's the basis of life itself. It's real.
I think it also applies to all love. I mean, just love for your fellow human being, and just in approaching people. Yeah, if you can manage it, but approaching people in that way.
Yeah.
Even people that have wronged you, even people that are that are lost.
Yeah.
Apply.
Yeah, it's really good to remember that. One of the things I try to do with my family when we get, sporadically attacked, often by people who really would like to, let's say, take me out, and along with me, my family. We sit and talk until we find a pathway forward that is characterized by the least amount of, desire for revenge and anger possible. After contemplating the anger and the revenge quite deeply, because you have to let that voice have its say too.
Yeah, there's no positive outcome in revenge.
No.
It's a horrible path to go down.
Fun as it might be in the moment.
It also, there's a extreme desire to feed that monster.
Yeah.
And that's what's dangerous with people.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I mean, that's a narrative that's been going on it's such a satisfying narrative too, like the revenge film or the revenge novel.
Well, yeah, and it's hard to distinguish that from justice, because you don't want the wrongdoer to escape scot-free.
Right.
So it's a very thin line, but with regards to your enemies, it's like, well, what do you hope maybe for your enemies? Well, you hope they wouldn't be enemies. That would be good. Wouldn't it be better if they were allies? That would really be good. Would it be okay if they only suffered enough to learn? Assuming they're wrong and you're right. And I'm careful about that assumption. But sometimes, you do get attacked by people who are clearly bad actors. It'd still be better if you could have what you really wanted. It'd still be better if they could be transformed into people who could see the light.
And oftentimes their suffering is their knowledge that they were wrong.
Yeah.
And when people have wrongly attacked you, and then realize it, they have to realize in themselves this flaw that they have in their personality.
Yeah, that's rough.
That's hard.
Yeah, well, that's why tyrants double down, man.
Yes.
That's
double
another
down.
thing that's so cool about the Exodus story. is
Yeah.
that, you know, even when God himself reveals himself to the Pharaoh, essentially, all he does is double down.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, and you might say, well, that's what tyrants do. It's like, no, that's what people do.
When we're talking about groups like the World Economic Forum, don't you think there's a draw to that? I don't know if it's people like Trudeau or people that go there. You're at the in crowd.
Oh, yeah.
You're with the people that are the big decision makers that are going to be in power. You're with the people that know where the bunker is if the nuclear bombs drop. You're with the people that are making the decisions, that are shaping politics behind the scenes, that are manipulating the relationships between corporations and politicians and lawmakers and across the board.
Yeah.
And so there's this desire that people always have to be a part of the in crowd, or the part of the secret group that's running things, which is why groups that are running things are so dangerous.
Well, this is also something that we're concerned about with regard to this new organization.
That's what I wanted to bring up.
Oh, yeah, man, absolutely. I mean, the last thing that we're hoping is that we create a new thing that just turns into another WEF in 20 years.
Right.
You know, regardless of what we want. Because,
Right.
And it's a tricky problem because there has to be some degree of international communication and consensus, right? Because we all do live on the same planet and we're pretty integrated now. And so there has to be something approximating, well, like I said, an international conversation. But the danger is the Tower of Babel. And the danger is that even engaging in that conversation, let alone leading it,
Right.
you know, just ends up producing exactly the same outcome. And that's, hopefully, we have people who are wise enough to, first of all, not want that for themselves because they know about the danger. You know, the danger is you lose yourself in a real sense. And also who are humble enough with regard to their conception of their own ignorance, that they actually do genuinely want to hear what other people have to say.
So you need extraordinary people to be a part of this.
Well, and then you get looped right back into that problem. Is now you're surrounded by the extraordinary people. I think what you partly want to do is you want to remind yourself that part of the endeavor is to help everyone reveal what's extraordinary within them.
Yes.
Right, that's there in everyone.
Yes.
Your job is to call it out. And I've seen extraordinary people in the worst possible circumstances. You know, people who are laboring under lives that were so bloody dreadful that it would take you a year just to describe it, who were still doing everything they could to aim up. You know,
Right.
Poor people, psychotic people, alcoholic relatives, devastated community, ill, like brutalized, horrible childhood, no friends, you know, and still looking around to see if they could find something good to do.
And you would never wish those circumstances upon anyone because most people don't survive them.
Yeah.
But a few people get through those with incredible character.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Like Yeonmi Park.
Yeah, she's
Perfect
a good example. Yeah.
An amazing
That's for
example. Like her childhood, her life experience in North Korea is one of the most horrific stories I've ever heard in my life. But because of that the horrific nature of the experiences that she had, she came out of this with this extraordinary character. And
I had a friend, Charles Joseph, a native Carver from the West Coast. He was in a residential school in Canada, and it was one of the ones that were genuinely bad, and it was bad. It was like Auschwitz level bad. It was really bad, and he was brutalized, man. You can't listen to him talk for 10 minutes without like the tears rolling down your eyes. And you know, he was devastated when he emerged, but he put himself together. You know, he was on the street for a while, quit drinking, quit mucking about, started carving, like turned himself into quite the stellar creature, you know, amazing moral.
again, you would never wish that on anyone. But it's incredible how through that adversity you create this extraordinary person.
Yeah.
And that extraordinary person could be a great light to so many other people that are going through terrible times and define themselves by the terrible circumstances that they find themselves in, which is a real problem with people.
Yeah, well, that's part of that victim narrative.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the things that's so comical about the Exodus narrative is that that's really what happens to the Israelites when they're in the desert, is they turn into whiny, backbiting victims. That's what happens. And it's like, it's the same thing 3,000 years ago. It's like, we don't know where we are, we're lost, we're resentful about it, we wish the tyranny would return, and aren't we hard done by, and gossipy. It's like, same old story, man.
It really is the same old story.
Yeah.
And this constant quest for meaning and understanding and fulfillment and a life worth living.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that's really been catalyzed for me, you know, over the course of my life, but particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, is that I don't think there is anything more real than that meaningful story. And I mean real in every way. I mean real as a manifestation of the central structure of the material world, real metaphysically, real psychedelically, real practically, like real. So, and I think that instinct that orients you towards meaning, that's the deepest connection you have to what is most real. You know, because people say, well, life isn't meaningful in its essence. That just means you're a reductionist, materialist atheist in your initial presuppositions. It's easy to flip that and say, no, the instinct that orients you towards engagement and meaning, that is the most real thing there is.
Yes.
So, and I believe that. It's also what helps you stay on the straight and narrow when you're in pain. So how can anything be more real than that? You know, what orients you when you're suffering?
Right.
There's a definition of real. Real is that which orients you properly when you're suffering. So, you know, that's not the same claim as, you know, the object's real.
Right.
It's a different idea, but
it's still real.
It's more real.
It's very real. Yeah. And we are, I mean, the thing that we have in common is we're all just human. And if we're all human, there's always going to be this weirdness to existence, and trying to figure out why and what it is. And also recognizing that some of the people that have defined why are so inherently flawed, and they're very selfish in their definitions, and you know, you have to kind of sort that out and parse through it. And one of the things that's been amazing about having a podcast is to present people with these different minds that have found their own way through it.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
That's what I loved about being a clinician too, is to see how different and crazy and strange and interesting people really are. If you listen to, it's like, you know, I had lots of clients in my practice who were they weren't people who would ever be put on a pedestal. You know, they were people who were in the dirt suffering away. But man, if you listen to them, they were so interesting that you just could hardly stand it. So that was a good thing to learn. And that you see, you know, you find gold in very unexpected places. Like I learned a lot from some of my most damaged clients.
I would imagine. Just what's possible.
Yeah, well, and how much people could still strive towards what was good, even if they had every reason to be. You know, I had clients whose lives were so terrible, you'd think no matter what they did, you'd think, yeah, well, it's no wonder you did that, because look what you went through.
Right.
But they didn't turn out to be
our prisons are
serial
filled with
sexual
people.
Slayers.
Our prisons are filled with people like that, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Jordan, we just did another 3 hours. It flew by in 10 minutes.
Yep. Good to see you, Joe.
It's great to see you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you very much.
Man.
Oh,
it's
listen,
always a pleasure to come
the
see
moment that was happening, I had to reach out to you because I'm like, this is just so bizarre and crazy, and it
like I
needs
said,
to be
it was
discussed.
your fault.
Yeah, it's my fault, so I had to have you on.
Yeah.
All right, let's go get something to eat.
All right, man.
So when this does launch and when it's official, when we can talk about it further, we will. Okay?
Yep.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. Bye, everybody.
Wow, flipping heck. Wow, flipping heck. Wow, flipping heck. How about that? Whoa! Whoa, whoa, whoa. Come back to what you know. Make everything real slow. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. What up, gang? Well. Wendy in the Galleria. We was just listening to The Doc, our good friend Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, speaking with our good friend Dr. Joseph Rogan. You know, whilst Akira the Don played music. And if that isn't nice, I don't know what is, huh? If that isn't nice, I don't know what is. God bless. God bless. Shouts out to everyone locked in. How you're feeling out there? How is that for you? How was that experience for you on this fine afternoon here at the peak of recorded human civilization? Thank you to everyone who super chatted during that. That was very nice of you. Joe Petrakovich, shouts out to you. Mike Can, shouts out to you. Trinidad, shouts out to you. Yeah, shouts out to you. What up, Robert Easley says, been missing Mazlantis, not realizing it. It's good to be back. Yeah, it is. It's good to be here. My guy, Eric Heinley. Eric Heinley, you righteous druid. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday to you. Shouts out to Insight of the Ages. Appreciate the support. Says, love you, brother. Thank you for all your magic. You're doing God's work for us, and we are so blessed by it. Hey, thank you for being here, brother. And thank you for the support. By Joe. Sagittarius, what's up? Appreciate you, my guy. Pixie, what's up? Appreciate you. If this isn't nice, I don't know what is. Thank you so much, Akira. Righteousness. Righteousness be thy name. What a beautiful day. Woo, says Shecky Pavel. Kobe King, what's up? Marie, what's up? John, what's up? Shouts out to everyone who hung out through that. What was that? How long was that? Hours. That's what that was. That was 3 hours plus. 3 hours plus. And the place. Oh my goodness. Beautiful stream, says Brother Grimm. Appreciate you. Free Consciousness says you can bring the internet to church. What up? Austin says, what's something about cop that new app complete with integrated dark mode? Integrated dark mode. Ha ha ha. What up, Mason? Appreciate you. What up, Scoops? 21 months of Scoops. Says it's good to be part of a live stream again. Yeah, it is. It's good to have you here. Being a part of the live stream again. Look, the lights are on, says Sagittarius. Yes, they are. Lights up in the club. Lights up in the club. Boom. Lights up in the club. Oh my goodness. There's a few very tingly little moments in that. That was fire, says Chad. Another for the ages, says Sheila. Super awesome, says Shecky. Sheila above clapping, says Black and Blue Fins. And everyone can picture that, can't they? Isn't that nice? Everyone can picture that. Best stream ever, says Jordan. After Terry Black's for Carnival meal, says Kobe. Yeah, I will be doing something similar. I'm going to eat a steak and go to the beach, I think. That's my plan. Eat a steak and go to the beach. Oi. Genre Ratspun says rave culture is weird. Yes, of course. All culture is weird. All culture is deeply weird. Blessed Sunday to all, says the Triode. Indeed. Indeed it is. Woo. That was very intense. I forget how intense these things can be. I don't know how I forget that since I've done these things. I am you know what I mean? This ain't my first rodeo. But I haven't done one of those since we left Texas. Due to technological constraints. But last night, I managed to work out a system, and the system did indeed work. So that was pretty cool. That's pretty exciting that we can do such things. That was delightful. Thank you for that treat. It completely made my day, says NJ Edmonds. Appreciate you. That's nice. Nemo Overdrive, what's up? That's a dope name. Says, thank you, Akita, for your music. Hey, de nada. De nada. It's an honor. Hey, how was that then? What did everyone glean from that? What were people's takeaways from that discussion? Sir Pepper says, been AFK from Meaningwave for a while. That was great to listen. Hey, good to see you. Yeah. Good to see you here. Sheila Ferreira. Meaning crisis and chill, Viveki. Question. Yeah, we got halfway through that, didn't we? And we have a bunch more of those to do. Oh, by Jove, we do. Ooh. Mushroom King Wolf playing FO4 using this for ambiance. It was awesome. Yeah, how about that? Anything else would have been unacceptable, says All-Star White Canadian. Quite right, too. Shecky says all systems go. Righteousness. Man, Andy Go, what a shame that half of this interview is a copy-paste of the previous one. I just happened to have listened to it yesterday. Thought it was a rerun. Now he's on Timothy Leary again. Trinidad, spirit of voluntary play. NJ Evans, do you ever think you'll go back to daily live streams? Or is that a project left in the past? We spoke a little about this on the last stream. So my current technological and spatial restraints do not allow that. However, things are shifting in that regard. So we will discuss it more. I love to chat about what God was throughout the Genesis stories. Music was perfect and the conversation moved me. Yeah, that's my favorite stuff. That's definitely my favorite stuff. I'm very interested in that stuff. We still have a bunch of the biblical lectures left to score, don't we? How about that? Thank you, Akira, says Michael. Yes. Appreciate you. Civ Cypher says, good to hear JBP clarify his anonymity stance. Still not convinced, but mostly everything else he said was based. Yeah, so that's that stance, and it's good to hear him clarify that because tweets on that subject I don't think have. And this is something I think about quite a lot, you know. And it's a real good point. I did tweet about this. With regards to my not, as you'll know, I'm in Mexico, and I used to live in the USA. All my stuff is still in the USA, apart from the stuff I've accumulated in the past year or so. And I can't go back and get it because I didn't get shanked. And people are like, oh, well, why don't you just get like a fake card? You know, you could get a fake card. Lots of people do that. I know lots of people who do that. And my thing is, well, if everyone who did that refused, made themselves heard, were unanonymous, then it would be an untenable policy. And it would also be untenable for the airlines and what have you. The amount of people, you know, mixed up in all that sort of thing. It would be untenable. So that's a similar argument. Remaining anonymous with regards to things of import has a great effect on what the swine can get away with, you know? So it's an interesting discussion. It's an interesting conversation. And very muy importante at this point. You know what I mean? Muy importante at this point. Shout out to Nightbot, says type support for all the links to support. Yes, exactly. Support Meaningwave, PayPal, Patreon, YouTube channel, memberships and merch, etc. Indeed. That's interesting. The Nightbot's telling you to type something. You could have just dropped a link. Sif Cypher says the fake shankage cards can only work in a pre-digital age. Exactly. Fake shank cards only work in a pre-digital age, and they only work if you allow them in. Once you're in, you know, once the precedent is set and the system is set up, then you can't go back. You can't escape. Silence is golden, says Austin Zombrum. Trinidad says fire. Rachel Scale says, well done. Jeremy Brimmer says he's got clout. Word around town, I heard something about that. Oh, stuck. What I got from it is consensus is politics / gossip. Meaning is truth. Never settle for anything less, be bold and brave. See, that's a very good summing up right there. I think that's something we can agree on. Meaning is truth. Never settle for anything less, be bold and brave. Be brave, brothers and sisters. Be brave. Shaky says, don't lie. A&B's, what's up? Thank you for this afternoon, Akira. It's been a wonderful gift. So thank you. Appreciate you. It's an honor to be here amongst such fine fellows as thou. What's the female word for fellow? You got ladies and gentlemen. What's fellows? Fellows, anyway. Sway! Feels good to continue the dialogue on education at many levels. A BA for 4K. Yeah, I'm assuming that's good, right? I don't know how much a BA costs. I exited education at the age of 16. That kind of education, then educating myself. And educating myself continues on a daily basis. A literal daily basis. Sheila says you should play that Akira did on MEANINGWAVE, Be Brave. Be brave. That's a banger right there. Banger from the pre-MEANINGWAVE era. Mason says, love that idea of psychedelics in some capacity being removing memory from association with awareness. Yeah, that's one aspect. I believe Huxley wrote about that in the Gates of Perception in Heaven and Hell, I believe. Yeah. Blessed and auspicious evening, lads and ladettes. Go forth and make good choices. Ssylvva. Indeed. We have a sale on right now at meaningwave.com. It's a January sale. We started it 2 days ago. At the end of January. It's running for till the end of January, which is like tomorrow or some shit. I don't know. So open up a tab, hit meaningwave.com. Go find yourself something dope. And get 20% off of it with the code FAV. No, it's not FAV. Jan. Code Jan, Jan, at checkout. Code Jan at checkout will get you 20% off of your order at meaningwave.com. Isn't that nice? Simultaneously, if you would like to support the wave, you can get on meaningwave.com. You can hit the support page, which will give you links to PayPal and Cash App and Patreon and things like that. Links for that are in the broadcast. We have a Patreon. You can be a channel member. You can drop super chats. You can go buy some records on Bandcamp. You can become a member at Bandcamp. There's lots of things you can do if you want to support the wave. Of course, one of the most powerful things you can do is let someone know about the existence of MEANINGWAVE. You know, you could. What could you do? You know, in supermarkets they have that thing, and people go, "Good, Marjorie, come over here. We've got someone dropped a single egg on aisle 3, and those are worth $1,700 now." You could commandeer that and shout, "MEANINGWAVE exists!" You could film yourself doing so and send it to me. I think that's a good idea. Rustin Null says, we need you in the fan back in the States. Blue Wave says, felt this conversation was classic JBP. Apart from the Anon stuff, it was 100% pure. Yeah, people don't like that. And I understand that. I don't know. I follow, with regards to, say, Twitter, I follow loads of Anon accounts that are, like, really useful. And, you know. But at the same time, as we just discussed, people publicly and in their own person saying things of import is deeply, deeply necessary. And powerful, very powerful. NJ Emmons says we got our superhero music. Yes, we do, NJ Emmons. Ooh. Sheila says, put up flyers, etch the sidewalk, spread the word every day, exactly. Checky says, all day, every day, look at my shirt, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. What would you be like? Alright, I said I'd play it earlier. This is pretty new. Came out last week. Pretty new. Shout out. I would dedicate this to you. Also you.
I was fat. That's why I talk about it. Go ahead and say something, motherfucker. I was fat too. And it was hard as fuck every fucking day to get up. I know what it feels like. When you roll your fat ass out of bed and all you want is some fucking damn cinnamon buns and shit. And fucking chuck and milkshake. I know what it is. I know exactly what it is. But I can't want it more than you. And so many people just want it the easy way. I'm sorry, man. It's not. What they start to do is they build this narrative. It's okay. When the narrative should be, you need to fucking work harder. You need to fucking discipline your mind better. We need to help people more than just saying it's okay. It's okay that you're not fucking willing to fucking help yourself out. That's not okay. It's not okay. It's not acceptable. Even though it's your life, if that's acceptable, that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. Even though it's your life, that's unacceptable. And just saying it's okay. That's not okay. That's not okay. That's unacceptable. And there's a lot of people in this world, me included, that if I accepted that, I wouldn't be anywhere. So yeah, a lot of people just fucking, they start creating a narrative about themselves that make it okay. The ultimate get out of jail free card. And now the world is set up to have so many get out of jail free cards. Everything is okay. And you can't say a motherfucking thing about it. It's not okay. It's not acceptable. Even though it's your life, if that's acceptable, that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. Even though it's your life, that's unacceptable. Then just saying it's okay. That's not okay. That's not okay. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. Even though it's your life, that's unacceptable. Then just saying it's okay. That's not okay. That's not okay. That's unacceptable.
Akira the Don, David Goggins, Unacceptable, brand new, out now. You can check that on your favorite streaming platform. You can download it. You can download it at meaningwave.com. You can download it at Bandcamp. Other places you download stuff. And you might want to start thinking about that. You might want to start thinking about that. We've already discussed the problems with streaming services. We haven't discussed the fact that the Spotify business model is untenable and it's unlikely to last. So I would definitely advise you own the music you love. Download it when you can, buy it on vinyl when you can, buy it on cassettes when you can. Hold on. It's okay. It's okay. That's a banger. Hold tight for more new music coming soon. Got a brand new mixtape coming. Is it? Do you say this week on a Sunday or do you say next week? Anyway, we have a brand new full-length epic Meaning Wave mixtape dropping later this week. Got some very powerful new music videos dropping this week. It's a beautiful day to be a meaning wave enjoyer. Sif says, how are some tracks on SoundCloud not available in Ireland? This is discrimination. I don't know. Send me a message and I will hassle my distributor. But this is an example of why you should just download the music you love. And you're not worrying about it. Because literally every week I have problems with some streaming service is not got a record on there, or they've removed one, or one's not in one country, one's in another, so on and so forth. Own the music you love, brothers and sisters. Only you can save mankind. John says this joint is very acceptable. I agree. Thank you for being here. I gotta go now. Dunk my head in some cold water and eat a steak. Maybe go to the beach. That might be nice. Thank you for being here. This was, I'm really glad that worked. And that was a joyful experiment. Let me know in the comments of this broadcast. You can drop comments in the broadcast. Let me know in the comments what you would like to see done next or in the future in this manner, playing music over a podcast or something else. That live thing. Since I can now do it, I think I might do more. Let me know what you want to hear. You know? Let me know what you want to hear. Trinidad says, Wolf, Alan Watts final when? Right. Oh my goodness. Chad says it was Fire ACD. Appreciate you. Thank you all for being here. Open up a tab, go meaningwave.com, go buy yourself something nice, get 20% off with code JAN, Jan. Leave a comment to let me know what you want to hear next in this kind of a format. Go forth, be mighty. God bless you, bad motherfuckers. Splash. Mm.